All right.
All right. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
I'm firing myself.
No, don't do it. You just developed the expertise to actually run it. Yeah, here we go.
And now
Yay,
here
it's
we
working.
go. What? Oh, it's a commercial.
Yeah,
I see
there's a commercial
Oh.
now. Whoops. Now, after all that time, we make people wait.
Oh, wow.
There's a commercial.
It's a
sponsored
Whoop
by?
commercial too.
Okay,
Whoop just
there
partnered
we
with
go.
Field Trip.
Oh, God. Well, somebody asked about Field Trip. Now we've got surveillance capitalism taking us to the advertisements for the
we're
surveillance
here.
capitalists. We could get a little bit more meta, I suppose.
Well, thanks for everybody for your patience. This is our first live stream, and it will be the first of many. So, for all of you who stuck around, this will be, the first of many. So, hi.
Hey.
Thanks for that.
It's weird. I'm watching us with the lag right now.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, this is
That'll,
really
that'll
uncomfortable
hurt
to
your
watch.
brain.
Shut
It'll hurt
that
your
off.
brain.
Yeah, but you're going to want to engage with the chat a little bit. So I don't know. We'll figure something out.
I'm gonna scroll underneath.
Oh,
the video.
I've got
I think
the
that
window
works best.
behind the video stream. So
Oh, good call.
like here we are. We're doing our first live stream. We have a percentage of the full Psymposia team. There are a couple of other folks who couldn't make it tonight, but they'll make it out to future live streams. And I think that we're all really excited about this. We've been talking about doing this for a while because we sort of drop these, sometimes they're statements, sometimes they're articles, sometimes they're podcasts where we comment on what's going on in the world, but interacting with the individuals who support us and who read our work has been like a goal of ours. And we read mail on the +3 podcast, and we read everything people send us. But this is a first for us, where we get to interact live via chats.
Did we say thank you for waiting?
We
There
did.
was like a feedback.
Well,
Okay,
we can say thank you
we
again.
should say it again.
thank you for
because-
waiting.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the patience.
Well, what happened was we were
Appreciate you
going
waiting.
live in the wrong room.
Uh-huh.
We were live in like our own private channel somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, but hopefully now it's figured out for the future.
So let's do some quick introductions. We've got Dr. Nishay Deveneaux with us.
Howdy.
What is your official Symposia title?
Medicine, Society, and Culture editor, I believe.
We got Russell Hausfeld here.
Hello. I write for Symposia.
You write a lot for Symposia.
Yeah, I believe you're
I
the
write a good deal for
senior
Symposia. You guys are kind enough to let me participate.
writer. That's terrible.
We have Dave, or David, more formally, Nichols.
Hey. I'm the managing editor of Symposia.
And then we have Brian Normand, also known affectionately as Normie.
You guys created that for me.
Yeah.
No one ever called me that before you guys.
Well, it was just we needed to distinguish you from Pace, and you're so normal. It fits.
And what exactly is your association with Symposia Incorporated?
I'm just always been the co-founder.
There you
Just
go.
like the ambiguous co-founder.
Yeah. So I'm Brian Pace, and I'm the politics and ecology editor at Symposia. As long as they'll let me do it.
You're on a
The
short
nebulous
leash. You're
they.
on a short leash.
Yeah. Well, I only get so many butchering of people's names and mispronunciations of
Yeah, you only get
common words.
3 per episode,
Right.
and then we cut you short.
Right. Well, for those of y'all who stuck with us, thus far, what we do have some announcements to make. Who wants to take that one?
Well, the main point of today, or a main point of today, was to announce that Symposia has officially received its 501c3 nonprofit status. So it's a bit of an exciting moment for us and for changing up some of the, formal structures of the organization. That being said, and not to pour cold water on it by any means, but our goal in changing to a nonprofit was to kind of signal some of our intentions and ideals, not because we think nonprofits are perfect, or that just by saying, hey, this is the structure of an organization, so now we are, fill in the blank. Yet there's real issues with the nonprofit industrial complex. We believe strongly that it's about what people do, what we do, what other organizations do, not what we say. And we just felt that presenting as a nonprofit was a decent way to sort of signal some of our intentions and hopefully live up to some of our ideals.
It's also a reflection of a larger general organizational shift that transcends just that. Like that's like on the paper, there's that shift, but there's a lot of other pieces to that transformation that we're also announcing today.
Sure. And over the last year, I mean, the organization is completely, kind of transformed tremendously. So
in a good way.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, kind of late last year, we decided, or early this year, late last year, we decided that we wanted to become a nonprofit. We got our determination letter a handful of months ago, and we've basically been spending the summer, the fall, just kind of like thinking long term, thinking advisors, where we want to go with everything. So that's kind of what we've been up to, kind of nonstop. And it's, at the same time, keeping track of where the space, how it's morphing, evolving, devolving is probably a better word.
Diversifying, rapidly diversifying.
Yeah. I mean, anyone who's been sort of interested or involved in a space more than a couple of years, over the last 2 years, it's like completely a new thing, sort of unrecognizable. So yeah.
Well, I would also say that there's something to.
I'm gonna pop my champagne bottle right now because
there we go.
Drinking.
All right.
I'm not gonna hold it off.
There's something to the nonprofit structure that that says that this is an endeavor that's in service. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
We are definitely we saw the need in the psychedelic and drug reform space for someone to be committed long term to acting in the public interest. There's a lot of carpetbaggers coming on the scene.
What's a carpetbagger?
Trying to make a quick buck. It's a term from I think the Civil War. It was post-Civil War. Yeah, it was post-bellum times where the Northerners, the Yankees, were coming down in their carpet luggage to the South to make a quick buck off the vanquished. So ultimately, it's
Are you saying that there's people that are trying to make a quick buck? And I mean, are you trying to say that
newcomers
so political,
trying to tap into a virgin psychedelic market?
You're being divisive.
Yeah. Well, like the reality is that there are a number of actors in the space, and here at Psymposia, we don't usually just talk in like woolly terms, like a number of actors. We name names, and we name names not because we're big meanies, but because we are a journalistic outlet that documents that which is transpiring, and it's important for us to comment on these things in real time. Something that Russell has been an absolute beast, as well as Dave, in making sure anybody who reads Psymposia gets the play-by-play. And
can I just say, like, that's
please.
on top of like them holding down like full-time jobs, and so it makes it extra remarkable. And also just like a thank you to all of our supporters, emotional and financial supporters, because it does mean a lot. We've been through a lot this past year, and the like Pace mentioned mail we've gotten, we really appreciate all of the kind like thoughts and feedback and everything. But just wanted to say to our supporters, thanks so much for being there with us through all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's been fun. It's been super fun. You know, because like Symposia has had different kind of versions of itself. And really starting, it was like, when was it? It was the summer of 2018, when there was sort of, in the spring of 2018, there was murmurings about a new group, Compass Pathways, and no one, you know, a handful of people were like sort of looking at them. And then I started hearing there was some whistleblowery type people out there saying like, what's going on here? And so I was really interested in that, because at that time it was like a completely new thing. The landscape at that time, the landscape in early 2018 was sort of like, dare I say, the legacy groups. It was sort of the map. I know, Dave.
Stop trying to make legacy happen. It's not gonna happen.
Did you not see me do this?
Yeah.
No, it
Well,
was
wait,
really like
you asked me about carpetbaggers. I think legacy institutions is even more opaque. Please explain.
It was the traditional groups. It was MAPS, Hefter, USONA was, I don't even know where USONA was by like early 2018. They were established. And then, you know, it was like those were the nonprofits, and then it was your universities, and it was sort of like that nonprofit university landscape that was out there.
It was around Michael Pollan's book when How to Change Your Mind came out, where really, if you were to plot on a curve, like it was just in terms of the number of researchers, the number of organizations, like it just skyrocketed. So legacy is kind of like pre-mainstreaming organizations.
Legacy is also it's a term that came in from tech, right? Legacy means outdated, outmoded. It was brought in by an organization.
Guys, I'm sorry I said the word.
You should be very sorry. And we're not going to use legacy, and we're not going to. Yeah. Anyway,
I found out that Dave, he was paying attention to it too. We linked up. I hadn't talked to Dave at that point in 3 years. We did an event back when I was at UMass Amherst in 2015. Dave,
I was at that event too.
Yeah.
Yes, you were. Dave came up for that, and yeah, we just kind of through Compass coming on the scene, we started looking at them really closely. We did like way too much research. It was unhealthy for us to do that much research.
I mean, it's a combination.
And basically, we started seeing everybody else come in. Compass kind of set that standard that the space was ripe for the for-profits to start moving in, and then it's just gone on since there. And that we sort of incorporated that type of critique, starting then, and we've just built on that. Sorry.
I just wanted to like add that it was a combination of seeing what was going on with some of these new organizations and hearing things from people, plus pre-existing kind of leftist perspective and critique that helped us to kind of know to look for certain things or see certain kinds of red flags and be like, that's that shenanigan that capitalism does, looking more deeply into it. So I just wanted to highlight that it wasn't just the specific institutions popping up, but these larger like systemic patterns that our field is just one cluster of.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you put it so succinctly, because in many ways we have had like a map, because what we're looking at is a new market, and those are rare these days, in the ever expanded global capitalist market. But there have long been critiques on the left of how the economy functions that have been incredibly useful for making predictions in this
explanatory value, as Dave's always mentioning.
You got it. Yeah. No,
one of the things.
This rush,
go ahead.
this mush rush.
Well, and as Normie pointed out, like we had a bunch of people who were reaching out to share things early on, insiders, people who were behind the scenes, people who would likely never admit that they were or are in contact with Psymposia. And one of the reasons that they did that was because at that time, like we developed an analysis and an understanding of what was going on that was well beyond what most people had. And, in the case of George Goldsmith's background at Tapestry Networks, I mean, I remember I was up at like 2 a.m. reading through the website when all of their corporate jargon just clicked, and it was like, holy shit, this is a firm that traffics in regulatory capture. Well, you start saying regulatory capture to people in psychedelia, nobody has a clue what you're talking about. You start saying the revolving door of business and industry and government, and suddenly people start saying, oh, okay, like control of the regulators.
Yeah.
And so there was like 1 or 2 other people who had that same understanding. And these were like true insiders who were involved in some of the organizations and institutions that were really concerned about what was going on. And so being able to plot down those analyses at people's feet and say, this is what we see, this is what we think, this is what has happened, this is how we projected going forward, it opened up a lot of doors for conversations. And it's one of the reasons why I think at times I certainly have this combination of amusement and annoyance, that when we try to explain what we see coming down the pike, we frequently get dismissed as alarmist or as, you know, fabricating things or just like sharing opinions rather than just the objective facts. And so I think like these anarchist or leftist or post-leftist or socialist or whatever term you want to throw at them, these critiques have gone a long way and are the kind of thing that are generally absent from,
you know, and it was like 2018, Dave, when we were starting to like think about sort of the like the surveillance capitalists moving in, when we were like, say, looking at if you look at Compass, one of their partners was Mindstrong. You can look at like what they're doing there. But when we were looking at just like how is surveillance capitalism kind of gonna get in here, that was like kind of like conspiratorial almost. It was like you had to couch what you were saying and you had to hedge a little bit. You had to be a little careful what you're doing. And then I wake up today and I have an email. I have an email about field trip with wearables, with the military and ketamine and wearables today. And it's like, oh, right. Great. That's nice.
So you mentioned wearables and you mentioned surveillance capitalism and conspiracy. I don't know that everybody really understands what surveillance capitalism
I'm not going
is.
to explain it all, but if you want to know where a lot of the space is going to go, just buy yourself a copy of this book. It's phenomenal.
Yeah,
you can do it TLDR though.
You can also check out Shoshana Zuboff's talks. There's a few of them. There's one that she gave in Germany that I highly recommend. But wait, before we get into surveillance capitalism,
are we going too far down the rabbit hole?
I just wanted a short one, but okay.
Well, I just know our propensity to go down a million different tangents.
True.
And so 2 things that we absolutely wanted to hit on is that we're going to be doing recurring live streams. The live streams will be open for anyone who wants to jump in. The recordings of those live streams will only be available to Patreon subscribers, I think at the $10 tier. But we just figured those are kind of things that are going to happen in the flash, in the moment. We'll have them scheduled. But, you know, generally speaking, we wanted those to have a sort of more maybe intimate, less sort of long-term documented general public feel, whatever.
Yeah, and space to just like hang out and shoot the shit, that kind of thing.
Sure, we've been like so bad with that, actually. You know, we've been so terrible with it. So it's been fun. Nishay has been pushing that.
Nishay, and
she's
Nishay
our YouTube expert.
She's the one who has really been the leading edge of the wedge.
Well, we've really been looking for our kind of natural allies, because so many people in the field in the psychedelic space is pretty conservative, you know, like surprisingly so. Like in terms of the people who are publicly speaking out in media and stuff like that, it's not a very leftist space. And so we've been really wanting to connect more with like left tube, bread tube, you know, other leftists that we don't have to fight so hard over the basic premise that capitalism is bad and exploitative, you know. So YouTube is one of the ways that we envision kind of doing that moving forward.
We had someone that emailed us. It's
antithetical to the mainstreaming project. The mainstreaming project says corporate sponsorship is the best thing since sliced bread, because, you know, we've been out in the cold for so long, and so many in the drug reform space look back on the 60s and 70s as a failure rather than a temporary like battle that was lost. And, you know, particularly because I'm looking at the comments here. Hello, Oregon. First of all, I grew up in Portland. I can't tell you how proud I am of, y'all for making, the dream real in a lot of ways, or taking really crucial steps. Yeah, the importance of the fight, the struggle. Power yields nothing without a demand. And here we are at a state level with an initiative process that I'm very familiar with. Literally, people signed a petition. Oregon has an initiative process where your signature actually can change policy. And it did. And it cut through a lot of politicking. Maps and USONA and Hefter have a particular strategy. It's a medicalization strategy. It says that if we just get the FDA to sniff our butts very well,
They're not going to like you.
And then we behave very, very well, then we will win the entire game. But it's important to inspect that trophy, that prize. That trophy is a medicalized psychedelic system that is not equal to access to anyone who needs psychedelics.
I would have been excluded from, for example, medical studies based on like family mental health issues and stuff that. So, well, just like pointing out, it's not just a matter. There's people don't have health insurance. People don't have basic,
I don't have health insurance.
Same.
Personally, I'm not like against the whole being able to go to a doctor and get this and go through that. Nobody, I'm not against that.
No one on this call is.
It's like when that's the
Dave
only
might be.
thing.
Dave might be. I think he's.
I'm not. No, I was going to say. What I was about to point out is that while nobody on this call is against that, if you look at the organizations that covered, the psychedelic organizations, the corporadelic actors, the corporate psychedelic pharmaceuticals, they came out praising Measure 109, right? The psilocybin service initiatives, which we have a ton of questions and concerns about. And they were silent on 110 on actual drug decriminalization, right? And I don't think I don't think that's surprising to people here, but to point out that we're not against medicalization in some ways, right? We don't think that that there's not an opposition to people being able to take this in a medicalized context, but from some of the medicalization players, there is concerns about the competition from decrim or what decrim means more broadly, even though anyone who's taken, any of the psychedelic pharma CEOs who have taken psychedelics have taken them either in an illegal context or need to claim that they went to somewhere where it was legal, right?
The big elephant in the room is like 5 people who out there that work at any of these institutions who have done it in a medicalized setting, like been introduced to it that way. Like it's nobody. Like when you compare how many people have taken psychedelics, how many people have actually been in the study, it's like almost nothing,
And
and somebody commented, by the way, that it looks like Compass might have opposed 109. But
who opposed
I guess
109
for me, I've just been.
Oh, go on, Russell. Sorry.
No, but I'd wrap it up quick. I was just going to say I've been sort of turned off by the corporate actors who want to say that, for instance, the new shamans of today are going to be doctors and psychotherapists, or there's a right or a wrong setting to take these in. Like everyone else has already said, I'm totally not against people taking these in a medical setting if that is what they feel correct in doing, but I don't also feel like that's the only right setting.
If that's your kink.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's what.
I don't want to yuck your yum.
Yeah, there's a lot of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just real quick. In the initiative process in Oregon, like when you vote on a ballot, there is like a ballot book, and it presents arguments for and against, and usually those arguments are presented by actual organizations that have a stake in the thing, and I'm not gonna. I don't remember exactly who it was, but it was an association of psychiatrics in Oregon. And they said, no, this isn't a good thing. And it's like, okay, on the one hand, you can have genuine concerns about mental health. And on the other hand, it's like, this really might be cutting into your bottom line here. So.
Yeah, I think they also made the point, though, that generally speaking, we don't legalize therapies by ballot measure. right? And if we look at the science, right, and this is a whole other discussion to have about what sort of protocols have been approved for how many people, in what contexts, for what mental health issues, right? And now there's talk about expanding that sort of across the board with the psilocybin services. But again, like I said, that's a whole issue, and we're starting to go down another rabbit hole. So the absolute second thing that we wanted to touch on before getting into the broader rambling shit shooting and topical discussions, we're actually going to be presenting a new merch store shortly. So I will share my screen real quick, and we can, is that coming through?
Yeah,
And
you
just
always take a
responding
second.
to
There we
Noah
go.
Heller in the comments, yes, the psilocybin service centers are not classified as healthcare centers, and yeah, the criteria for who will be a provider, as far as I know, is yet to be determined. But
Right, and I think somebody else had also commented in the chat about field trip sniffing around. To be
we'll
fair,
get to that.
we don't know anything around field trip, or we don't know much other than that they're looking for sites. And yeah, I'm sure that will come up later. So we have a new store that will be accessible soon.
If anyone wants these
this is
shirts,
my
'cause we
first
get
time seeing
emails.
this.
We get emails all the time. If anyone wants the screen printed shirts, I would get them now because we're not going to be having them much longer. The first two there.
And, yeah, the screen printed, the ones that go down to the
eyeball
bottom.
lady, the eyeball hair lady.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're really nice, by the way. They're really soft.
The quality on those is great. The new t-shirts are solid too, but yeah, those old designs are going to be going, and when they're gone, I don't know that there will
Pace,
be any more.
you're not wearing your corporadelic mushroom head.
I know, I forgot my
should've-
shirt. I just went to go grab mine so I could
We
share
got
it once
one.
we
Wait,
are
hang
out
on.
of
We got one printed
full
up for
screen.
Pace.
Here we go. I got this.
So yeah, so we've got, the decriminalize all drug shirts, the corporadelic actor shirt, the little mushroom man in a suit, regular Psymposia and +3 shirts with their leaf and +3
And plus
Shulgin
three being
scale
our,
logo.
our podcast, if anyone doesn't know.
That's right. Nishay, you want to speak to the name at all, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's from the Shulgin scale.
Finish up your little salesman.
What we've got?
Yeah, we can talk about that later.
Here.
Sorry, we've got baby apparel, we've got hoodies.
I made
The
I made
bathing
the baby
suit?
apparel. Look.
Check
I
out
made the
the
baby.
bathing suit.
I made the baby thing because Brian Pace always has his little newborn baby with him. all
Yeah.
the
I
time.
do.
He
If
comes
you
on
tune into
calls.
future live streams, I'm almost certain that I'll be hanging out with a little dude. So
Yeah, we have a Psymposia baby one piece that should fit babies anywhere from 3 to 24 months. We've got a Psymposia one piece swimsuit. We've got
I never
Psymposia
thought I'd have
embroidered
Dave.
beanie.
Anarchist Dave. I never thought I'd have anarchist.
Yeah, you
Dave
get me to
over
do
here.
the product pitch. The shirt that is not here that is killing me. We have a shirt in the works.
Yeah, sorry.
It's coming soon. Russ has done some great artwork for it. It's
Russ is quite the cartoonist.
Yes. I killed my ego, and all I got was this lousy superiority complex. So that will be popping up soon as well. We've got tote bags, we've got mugs in 2 sizes, drawstring bags, bath towels, nice embroidered backpack.
I didn't know we had backpacks. I like that.
Yeah, buttons, stickers, pretty much anything you buy, it goes to it gives you sweet merch or whatever, and it lets
It's also
us keep
tax
doing.
deductible.
Well,
Not
to
the
be fair,
merch.
Is it not?
the
Right?
merch that you buy is not tax deductible. For
fuck.
some of the donations where you get merch, if you're
That's
interested
number
in
one,
a
Pace.
in a
See,
tax deduction,
I screwed something up already.
Yeah, well, we can work that out. If you want to make a tax deductible donation, just reach out. We've also got lysergamide free blotter art. One of those bring
Add
your
your
own.
own.
Yeah. We would certainly never endorse that being used for any illicit purposes.
Those are actually really nice.
Yeah, the quality is great. And then we've got canvas prints, and I think I also screwed up in, well, I won't call attention to it, and hopefully no one will see it. Anyway,
Yeah.
strike one
no,
against me.
Good work on that,
Actually
Dave.
fine. I forgot that there was another URL there. That's fine.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, so those, I think the fact that we're going to be hosting regular regular live streams, and that we'll have a new merch store launching in about a week. We have a whole new
next
website
week,
going live in about a week.
We're gonna switch over everything next week. We were gonna do it this week, but there was some hiccups. So next week that'll be all live. Thank God, because I'm sick of that.
I forgot to wear it, but I have my +3 shirt here.
Oh, nice!
It's
awesome.
I can vouch that's really soft and cozy.
Yeah,
someone just bought some stuff.
Hey, so I'm checking out the chat, and Michael Green says, "Could someone clarify the current status of the psychedelic clinic concept that is coming online?" Anyone? Any takers here?
That feels
Compost
vague.
John says, "Looks a little capitalist to me."
Yeah.
There's no ethical production or consumption under capitalism. So that's my only defense.
Because there's a lot of like different visions for what that would look like, right? Like even like the state initiatives and stuff. Like there's not like one model. Like there's different organizations and are trying to kind of like cohere something that will be of benefit to them. But I think there's different versions, right?
Of psychedelic clinics.
Yeah. There's not like one like thing that will turn into. There's like competing efforts, like based on groups or whatever.
We currently have ketamine clinics, which I guess are officially dissociative clinics, but they're often sort of talked about in the same way. And in that sense, you'd be able to go to provider. Okay, gotcha. In any case, sorry, I just had a little stuff going on side. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's the MDMA model is pretty. It's pretty well defined.
I mean, the ketamine model right now is like, go check your mailbox and go check your mailbox and do it.
The ketamine model also raises an interesting question, right? Like, why are all these people flocking to ketamine? What's going on here? And I think there's an important point to be made about early mover advantage, right? And the fact that people are trying to get their feet in the door to establish themselves as psychedelic providers. And we've seen people trying to get their feet in the door as psychedelic providers, where they've even said, we're offering psychedelic services that don't include any psychedelics, right? It's breath work, or it's something to that. It's virtual, it's, what have you. And I think looking at how people
that's what psychedelic means now, apparently.
Well, stick it where you will. I think looking at the way people are trying to carve out niches or spaces in which to operate kind of highlights so Lou is in the chat asking, what we do about it, right? Like, what do we do? And I think there's a few things to point at, right? So in the case of, say, Oregon, we just saw a decrim measure that now
statewide.
Right. Not only is it statewide, but okay, so it removes, in theory, certain penalties, right? It significantly lowers the risks to users. And I think if we think about the sort of ethos that we spread, right? What are we looking to do with these compounds? How are we looking to share them? When you see people hanging out shingles and saying, I'm a psychedelic therapist, why are they doing that? What are they after? There's a lot of people who sort of presuppose that they should be able to eke out a livelihood on the back of playing shaman for other people. But personally, I have a lot of questions about why and how that's justified, and how, when we're talking about experiences that are by nature unmediated, right? Nobody can get between you and your receptor sites, right? Like, at the end of the day, it might be helpful to have people who assist you in making meaning. But even when we talk about integration and integration coaches and therapists and the like, there's a lot of people who want to insert themselves into making meaning for you. There's also a lot of people who look to outsource that meaning making to other people. Tell me what it means. And personally, I think that a huge component of the psychedelic experience or psychedelic experiences is for people to grapple with the tough questions and to figure out, what does it mean to them?
Speaking of grappling with the tough questions and not having somebody explain it for you, as somebody who is literally taking psychedelics in the 90s, the concept
way to date yourself.
Yeah, I know, I'm super old. The concept of like putting the words coach and psychedelic together That wouldn't have made any sense to me at that time. Not at all. Coach was not the guy I was interested in hanging out with way back when. But the points that Dave's raising are super valid, and actually they're kind of like part of the sort of, what is it, the psychedelic canon. I mean, wasn't there a time when they said, organized religion doesn't want you to have the psychedelic experience because then all the priests would be out of a job. Didn't we just launch a nonprofit? Is that what we did?
Cheers.
Anyhow.
Someone broke their rule. I won't say what the rule was.
Oh yeah.
Well, first of all,
special occasion.
Well, in my house, we pop corks on people's rear ends. However, I found out this doesn't actually have a cork, so I guess I gotta buy more expensive champagne for that
Pretty
one.
good.
But in any case, this idea that psychedelics are the unmediated mystical experience, and the mainstreaming process that we're seeing, the regulatory process that we're seeing is.
Well, can I just say it doesn't have to be understood through mystical experience. It's
No, it
still
certainly doesn't.
Just wanted to caveat because
It's direct regardless. Yeah.
It's messing with your brain chemicals, your brain meats, But yeah, I think it's a fair criticism to say, well, it doesn't really matter if it's somebody is a therapist or a supervisor or a facilitator or a priest or shaman. That is still sort of an intercessor, an intermediary between you and your brain meats.
So to the question of what do we do about it, right? Like, first and foremost, I think, again, back to this question of sort of communal ethos, and rather than viewing it as a single psychedelic community, right? We're all, I mean, when you think about what community means, and when you think about the people you're in community with, you're probably in community with a bunch of different people, most of whom are not like truly geographically connected in the way that like a village might be, right? And so we've got these sort of geographically disparate, distanced connections of people who have similar ideas or orientations towards the world, right? And so if we're thinking about how you could counter some of the corporadelic moves or how we might propagate the dynamics we'd like to see, I think encouraging people to share and share alike. I mean, for me, I come from a background of moderating the DMT Nexus, helping out with Share the Seeds, really trying to do the on the ground work of how to make this stuff accessible, not through changing the laws, which, great, cool. I don't have issue with people trying that at all, but like, you can go out and get some plants and extract them and you've got compounds. You can go out and get some spores and grow them and you've got compounds. You can, there's so many different ways to get drugs that don't require appealing to some sort of higher power. It's just like, becoming familiar with nature and how it grows, literally. And
because also of the importance of the, rhetorical conditions of set and setting, there's something added, right? When it's this gift in community, something that someone like cares for you and knows you and loves you and like wants to help you out in a specific way outside of the strictures of capitalism, and
or
just
something
being able
you
to,
even created yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's that adds the whole, in terms of like bonding, between friends and stuff, and rethinking sort of the possibilities in light of this like crazy post-COVID hellscape that we live in. Just there's all of these opportunities that the notion that we have to like all get in line in a specific queue because the corporate medicalists are trying to convince us that it's in our interest to play their long game. Like, no, like we're not going to roll over and participate in that, just because they feel like they want to make money, and like working on that, cultivating community and cultivating that peer-to-peer network of support and information, even for things like growing or,
So, and I've seen gardens that, the person who grows that garden or the people who grow those gardens are never going to be able, even if they were determined, they would never be able to eat or brew or smoke everything that's in that garden, right? And it's quite possible to grow surpluses. It's quite possible to create arrangements where we, again, this notion of mutual aid, the notion of shared resources, the fact that it doesn't all have to be competitive and in pursuit of profits and serve some sort of, at the point where you start making staking out your food, clothes, and shelter on the back of providing psychedelic services. What happens when you're not in a space to provide good psychedelic services? Let's say you're totally well-intentioned, but something is going on in your life that means you can't actually be attentive to people in the way that you need to be. But capitalism doesn't give a fuck. You still need to pay your rent.
Your electrical bill doesn't care if you're not in a fully regulated like nervous system space, able to thus provide support for somebody's more dysregulated nervous system, as a decent, at least support person should be able to do. I feel that. We all, labor under these, I mean, come on, like it is, we're in the 8th month of a global pandemic, and most of us, I'm pretty sure most of us are still being required to labor on, mostly as
technically
if nothing has changed
since the outbreak.
Yeah,
but
in the United States since lockdowns started, most places. In the chat, I'm seeing Noah Heller asking again, specifically, if someone in the local press asked you about Field Trip coming to town, how would you respond?
I would respond I would say, what do you feel about a company that advertises psychedelic therapy without psychedelics?
And who consistently throws themselves in as the first ever in so many different categories that maybe they aren't. They frequently call themselves the first of everything.
Yeah.
Let's put this in a different context here. Dave and I start a company, right? And then we offer cannabis therapy, but we don't have any cannabis in it. What do you feel about that?
I mean, it sounds like you're telling a fib.
I bet we could do a reverse takeover of an extractive energy company, skirt regulatory scrutiny, and get listed on a Canadian stock exchange if we did that.
Sounds opaque. To generally speaking, though, I would say, because in terms of companies coming to town, Oregon will see companies coming to town because it is a very favorable environment to do things that otherwise, I don't know, companies like, I believe I'm correct, is Field Trip have operations in Jamaica?
Yeah,
correct?
well, they were working with the University of something down there.
That made sense because it was a good regulatory environment, right? Well, Oregon's a better regulatory environment.
Someone can comment on this that knows more about the Oregon legislation than me, but my understanding there was some kind of language there that the people starting it or the owners or something like that had to have resided in Oregon for a little bit. Was there?
Yeah, there's also restrictions on like advertising, and to be fair, there's a 2-year period where we're gonna see, what it looks like going in versus what it looks like coming out. And I know some of this will stay the same. We'll see what changes. I guess for me, and I'll shut up, Pace, because I saw you wanted to. Okay. For me, like my concern about Field Trip is, let's see, the dynamics we've seen to date, like the fact that doing reverse takeovers of companies in order to list on stock exchanges by default means that you get less regulatory scrutiny than if you did a proper IPO, initial public opening. Obviously, like I can't comment on Field Trip's motivations. I can just see that on paper, that's something they're afforded by that approach. When I look and I see, Field Trip also has an app. Right? For me, anybody who's running an app, especially people who are going to start talking about HIPAA compliance and all sorts of other things, like it's all bullshit because the kind of data that's tracked by an app falls well outside of the scope of HIPAA. And this is probably not
HIPAA being the law that protects your medical information from being shared with anyone else, just so we're clear.
For people who are interested, I really recommend looking at Google's Project Nightingale as a starting point because they ran into all sorts of issues about what was data privacy, what was not. And all your search data, it's not actually medical records. So if you're searching like hemorrhoid treatment, like, hey, guess what? Google can now guess that you or someone you know has hemorrhoids. And maybe they see that somebody else,
someone you know pretty well.
Yeah, I would hope. Right. And so there are things like when you start looking at the granularity that comes with data, and then you want to look at like, say, the way that companies frequently cooperate with law enforcement, right? So now you've got Field Trip that's encouraging you to share all sorts of potentially incriminating details and information on their trip report form, or I think there was something like that, right? Where, and you can use it. It doesn't have to be for drug experiences. We know that they're not legal yet, but maybe people want to put their meditation experiences or whatever. They're sure, fine, whatever. But what happens to all that data? Who's overseeing it? How does it get used? Where is it being stored? There's really, sorry, go ahead, Russ.
No, I was just thinking about that. I read a Filter magazine article the other day about the DEA trying to get expanded access to prescription medications and all your data on that and all that stuff too.
You think they're not going to come after if they know that all of these apps have information on potential drug users, that there's not going to be, some interest. And that's just one, there's a whole bunch of lines, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but of paranoid thinking, right? There are things that can go wrong that don't seem outside of the realm of possibilities. And for me, like when I look at some of the corporate actors, I just see I see a lot of circumstances that make me uncomfortable. I see behaviors, I see patterns of action. Nishay and Ronan from Field Trip were on a panel together at ICPR. And to my mind, that was a conference in the Netherlands. And to my mind, Ronan made a bunch of comments about business and capitalism and how marginalized communities are treated, and maybe it's better that they're marginalized because, hey, at least they're a community that identifies as a community, and like a bunch of, and I'm not saying that he meant that in a malicious sense, but when you listen to some of his comments, there's not a lot of thought about the fallout of their actions, and I think that alone is really concerning and indicative that like the profit motive is first and foremost, and everything else is secondary. And to me, in general, that's a problem. When we talk about psychedelics, it's a problem that's then like ramped up to a totally different level.
It relates. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna be a jerk.
You jerk.
I was just gonna be saying we got all the conscious capitalists, B Corps, who profit's not the only motive, Dave.
Just real quick, one of the things that I've
look at the face
brought up in connection with this is the Snowden's comment about, regardless of whether you have a good intention now, collecting certain kinds of data creates the architecture within which certain kinds of oppression becomes possible. It's like, don't build hellfire, don't build this technology that's capable of being used in really shady ways, even if right now you have good intentions. I think that's a piece of the conversation.
It's an important piece, and it ties in like the founders of the Pirate Bay. They were asked to put in all of this additional infrastructure for like tracking users. And they were like, oh, but like, the people who were advocating for it said, oh, just make it so that it's protected through whatever encryption, or that you can't access it, but you can only access it through these channels. And the creator said, no, like if we don't collect the information, it can't be used. If we don't host it somewhere, it can't be taken. We just won't create the structures, and then we don't have to worry about it, rather than creating all of these things that can be gamed and cheated down the line. And I'm sure, again, there's a bunch of really well-intentioned people who want
That's fine, but you can be as well-intentioned as you want, but when your VC overlords come knocking and you're not providing the potential revenue streams from the data collection that you have,
you happen to have this like really like,
you're not going to be CEO anymore, or you're going to
no, you're not. Whatever. There's a fiduciary responsibility to turn profit every quarter.
Can you imagine
do that every
or if you're a small company and they pop up and they say, we see what you've done here. Like, let's say you collect data in order to do one thing, right? And it's all very, again, well-intentioned, well-constructed, like it's encrypted, it's walled off. It's the kind of thing that actually you've done as much due diligence as you could be imagined to do. Now a VC firm comes in and realizing there's potential from the surveillance dividend and says, actually, we're going to throw 40 million bucks at you because we recognize that if we pry the data from this and we actually change some of it on the back end, we can do like hundreds of millions in targeted ad sales and other things, right? We can track patient data in all of these ways that otherwise wouldn't be accessible to us. So we can make you an offer you can't refuse. And guess what? You end up taking the money and leave, and now you have no control over what happens anyway.
So let's talk about DEA surveillance, because these administrative subpoenas that they've been collecting since before this sort of Snowden era of knowledge about the NSA's mass data collection. We were talking about that earlier. There's access to medical records there. Sorry, that come out of nowhere. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, it's a thing. I mean,
they're going to try to, get as much as they can without pushback.
What happens? Do you want to talk records, right? And forget records in the sort of traditional paper sense or even the digital sense, right? And this is something, again, we talked about Compass briefly earlier. We talked about Tapestry Networks, George Goldsmith's prior company. They had a document called Beyond the Pill. The Beyond the Pill document basically talks about how 10% of the healthcare spend is on the medication and 90% is on everything that happens around the medication, everything from, the in-hospital care to the infrastructure around that, to the digital technologies, to, all of these other components. And so when firms are looking at the whole industry around these treatments, and, it raises the question of why else do you think Cisco and Google and all of these other tech companies are trying to get involved in in healthcare? And it's because there's huge amounts of money to be made. So if we stop thinking about this just as paper records or even computer records and start thinking about, let's take the issue of say, psychedelic therapy, right? We know on the record, a number of psychedelic therapists have had issues, have gotten in trouble for sexually assaulting clients, right? And we also know that there is a desire to cut costs when you're running a clinic. So we can imagine, and actually the reason that we have a therapist dyad in MDMA therapy is because there were some notable cases where therapists abused clients. And so they said, well, if we have two people, that'll make it less likely to happen. Obviously, since then, we've had cases where that didn't hold up. I would suggest that's because the two therapists involved are people who have, relationships with each other. But taking it beyond that, we know that there's going to be a desire to cut costs in psychedelic pharmaceutical businesses. So imagining a world where, say, we have a corridor full of therapy rooms and we still have, I'm sure the desire would be to get to know therapists, but imagine we have one therapist. And then we have a second therapist that's in like a security booth on call. And you have some sort of like AI enhanced camera, right? You have a second camera that's in the room in order to observe. So you've got one therapist plus the camera plus the algorithm. And that's great. The camera's able to alert, let's say, effectively to whatever potentially alarming or problematic behavior might come up. And the second therapist can come in. Maybe it's not just that it detects something bad from the first therapist, but it can detect that the patient's in distress. Well, it's not just picking up those moments, right? It's picking up the entirety of therapy. So now you have these huge databases potentially of patient data from some of the most intimate, deep dives of the human psyche that you could imagine. And you don't just have one or two, you have your entire database of patients. Well, you can compare theoretically all of those patients' data. You can run analyses on the data sets. We know that there are apps that can predict your credit score based in part on how many times you plug your cell phone in. Once you have granular enough, big enough data sets, the things that start to emerge, like we honestly don't have any clue. And I can't tell you what would come out of those data sets, but I'm certainly alarmed to think that like this is something that would be incentivized by the systems we're building, by the paradigm that's being pursued. And the fact that we're not really talking about that, we are, but that we don't see broad ethical discussions about, hey, these things are likely going to be used in close proximity to each other. And we have very, very primitive grasps on any of it. To me, that's alarming.
Yeah, it is alarming. And I've said, this is me stepping on Nishay's toe, but I say the future, it's not it's not Orwellian, it's not Brave New Worldian, Huxleyan. It's Philip K. Dickian. The corporate company that you're working for and in debt to also has access to your dreams. And it reminds me of what is it? It was the second season of the OA where they were doing just that. They were mining dreams. But yeah, these kinds of big data approaches, they no one would use them if they weren't useful. And we saw that with the last election, with Cambridge Analytica, with the employ of Facebook data to literally swing an election by targeting people, targeting, for instance, Catholics who regularly go to church and voted in the last election.
That's a whole other can of worms.
It is another can of worms, but it does relate to this big data approach.
Sure. I'll give you that.
If you want to get back to your can of worms, don't let me stop you though.
No, I just think my personal opinion is all the Cambridge, yeah, of course, super concerning, but I think it's a distraction for a shit candidate, personally.
No, but if you can pick up
you
on someone's like deepest fears and paranoias, and then like present their version of reality, their construct, in a way that specifically appeals to those like primal worldview aspects of somebody, then you more are able to, like Inception style, in my opinion, like present someone with a compelling enough perspective that they take it for granted that that's the way things are. And I feel like once you're interacting with people on that level, like where is consent going? It's like, are people really making their own free choices, or like has advertising just gotten to be like very specific, you know?
And when you have, again, not to
it's become atomized and individualized.
Right. But when you have data sets that allow you to target that individual, right, to say that, hey, we have enough people who exhibit this sort of like brainwave phenotype, whatever, right? Like you have enough people who sort of exhibit these behaviors or these responses to these input, who articulate these fears in therapy, who have had these traumatic experiences, and we can correlate the use of all of this language. I mean, we know MindStrong, just real quick, we know MindStrong, the Compass partner, is already pulling everything on your phone, right? Like that's how they create their profile of you. So to have something that's even that much more dynamic from, say, a therapy setting, and to then be able to plug all of those different data points in, I mean, combine that with whatever sort of monitoring they're doing, right? Of your heart rate, of your pupil dilation, Google Glasses never went away, right? Google Glasses are now being used by people who are in industries where they need their hands free, but benefit from having a heads up display. And this is the thing that happens with this sort of technology. Society at large said, holy shit, this is too creepy. This is perpetual surveillance from people wearing Google Glass. Get it gone. It didn't go away. It's being used elsewhere. And thinking about like the eye
same with
augmented
reality as well. Augmented reality, could be used, if widely applied, to create fully immersive 3D art, immersive spaces. And actually referencing again the second fucking season of the OA. I'm sorry, I'm a little obsessed. That's out there. But Microsoft licensed this technology to the Department of Defense, and they specifically decided to employ it to do things like model cities to increase lethality. Okay. So, I mean, this kind of, how do tech companies make money? Hey, there's always money in war profiteering, right? So,
you think psychedelics are going to get used by the war machine?
What authority in the psychedelic space could have ever confirmed such a just an outrageous claim?
You couldn't possibly be talking about Rick Doblin, could you?
None other than Rick Doblin has confirmed that MDMA has been used with an at least one active duty soldier who did indeed go back to the field of battle after getting treatment for PTSD. So it's just fact. It's the world we live in.
And something
Michelle, you're gonna say something.
Yeah. Well, so just putting something that Lily, who couldn't be here tonight, she's the arts and gender editor, was saying with something that Thought Slime. Oh, sorry. Thought Slime, which is a favorite.
Hi, Thought
my
Slime.
favorite
We
YouTube
like Thought
channel.
Slime.
And yeah, Pace is also a super fan. But he was talking about just the potential, and this is it was like hearing Dave speaking again, because Dave said the same thing, in conversation, but the idea that for him specifically, the psychedelic experience helped him, completely helped him to see the systems and the capitalist bullshit that we live under, and really clarified certain kinds of separation from the hegemony of capitalism that came from his psychedelic experience. And then Lily just added the other day in a separate conversation the idea that you're having this very non-specific, open, systems oriented kinds of experiences, and then you come back and you have to talk to this neoliberal, individualistic kind of therapist who's trying to take all of this potential class solidarity and fold it back into you as an individual in your childhood and your past, and disconnecting from that more collective solidarity consciousness. And that's another just aspect of the ways that if we take it seriously, that set and setting is really important. Why wouldn't it have a huge impact like this, forcing it through one highly mediated model?
Yeah, and for people who are interested in more on set and setting, I'd really recommend checking out Ido Hardikson's book, American Trip. He does some really phenomenal lensing of the sort of different generational treatments of set and setting.
Yeah, we did a podcast with Ido.
Thrown
it's
it
fantastic.
in the chat.
Excellent.
I woke up at
And for
6
anybody
a.m. to
who
do
is
that
interested
podcast.
in
Same here.
psychedelic videos, he also runs the Psychedelic Video Museum, which is
really great.
online.
He's a really great guy and a really great thinker.
The fucking gem.
And
I'm sorry, just real quick.
You go.
His essay on the history of the idea of set and setting, including its relationship to collective set and setting, or what's possible to think and experience when it's a given time and place. That article I've taught for so many years in my classes, my college classes on psychedelics. And so it's just it's really brilliant. I recommend reading it.
I believe
it's just
that
funny.
article is on the Video Museum website, maybe.
Yep.
I think.
Yep. Yeah, I think his whole.
We'll throw a link
there.
in the chat, or I'll throw a link in the chat.
So,
go ahead.
Ali, who is in the chat,
I wanted to
asked,
get the comments. People talking. Let's look at some of these.
Ali asked about with all of this, how we view other psychedelic media, and he sort of, I assume, stumbled upon the PR parroting either article or podcast. So we have, we're not hiding our views on how we think that other psychedelic media should be conducting itself while interacting with, potentially dubious claims of, new actors and self-interested outfits. Go on.
I just want to be real for a moment and say that it comes up to the same issues that we brought up earlier, or that I brought up earlier around food, clothes, and shelter, right? Like when you have press outlets that exist that are looking to justify their existence by producing content or making money or selling copies or whatever it is, right? There's this need to publish. There's a need to generate things that can go out, and running press releases, running stories that cater to the dominant narrative. It's easy. It's simple. You've got tons of people who are beating down your door to give you stories that you can then share. But what does it do to the actual terrain? I mean, for whatever it's worth, there's a reason I'm a glassblower. Like, I didn't want to actually tie my ability to comment on psychedelia to also needing to earn a living off of psychedelia. That was from the outset. It was apparent to me that was going to truly hamper my ability to comment the way I feel.
Yeah. Which is also another reason that we're going nonprofit. If
it's absolutely a number top 3.
If we were to stay as a for-profit in the form of an events company, a corporation. Well, no, as like a corporation or LLC, which we were an LLC. That would require us heavily doing ads and scaling it that way, getting some sort of investors in, probably doing some kind of fucking nonsense reverse takeover or something like that. That's what it would require. It would require us putting out lowest common denominator articles, like real mainstream articles,
Quick,
quick,
frequently.
And
frequently,
political,
to get
format, networking.
totally devoid of politics,
Things that don't
towing the
ruffle
mainstream.
feathers.
What was that, Dave?
Things that don't ruffle feathers. Sorry,
Yeah,
what you were saying.
towing the
Towing the
mainstream narrative. It was interesting. Listening when we had Douglas Rushkoff on. He was commenting on Early Wired. It's getting in bed with the people who we're critiquing, and it would require us, doing various sorts of advertising. That's where the money is.
You don't think critique makes nice pillow talk?
Not in my experience.
That's what it would require. We ultimately didn't want to do that. What's the point?
Hey, actually,
fun.
we should...
hang on. I have fun doing this shit. I learned doing this shit. I have fun doing this shit, and this team is awesome. And this is what I want to do. Going that other direction is just it's selling out. It's really selling out. Fine, you're gonna sell out to get security, get a nice paycheck. One of the things that Rushkoff said, in the early tech space, was that you have all these grungy hackers working in their garages who, you have Sergey Brin coming around. Here's $1,000 a week, come get an office space or something like that. Yeah, people are gonna take it. I'm not criticizing the people for taking it.
Sure.
You got to do what you got to do. But that's just.
But also, let's talk about that. You don't get to both do that and say, and we're not going to talk about that. If you're going to make that decision, and you're going to say that's not open for discussion, to me, that indicates that that there's something
and
up there.
Certainly don't call us controversial for pointing it out, because you can go fuck off if you're going to.
Oh, speaking of controversial, hang on. We just saw the other night on online that Mind Medicine Australia has just partnered with a company whose CEO hails from a background at Palantir. So he was a strategist at Palantir. So now we know that there are at least two people with direct ties, the other one being Peter Thiel himself.
I would say three,
right? Cam? Or
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's Founders Fund, at least.
Sure. So again, that to me, that seems more controversial than the fact that, we've said some things that have made some people.
But no, hang on. Let's just back it up.
Maps has taken $250 a year from Rebecca Mercer, put the press release out in the middle of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And now, I actually wasn't aware of this up until I was aware of Parler.
Parler, the app where you can visit everyone you've blocked and unfriended on Facebook.
I was aware of Parler because I'm a Massachusetts person.
They should hire you for PR.
And Kurt Schilling, the Red Sox pitcher. Kurt Schilling, the Red Sox pitcher, is just the most hated guy in Massachusetts because he's just an asshole. And so I remember when he got bounced off of Twitter, he went right to Parler. But I actually had no idea that Rebecca Mercer was one of the funders.
I was just reading about that recently. I didn't realize that. I was thinking of
I'm not surprised at all.
But guess what? She supports psychedelic therapy, so shut the fuck up.
Yeah. So Patty 9398 revisited the question about Oregon. Company owners need to be 50% Oregon residents. I've spent a lot of time international, and I did spend a little bit of time in Costa Rica. One of the reasons why there's a huge expat population in Costa Rica is because there is, I believe there's not a requirement of 51% ownership of a resident. So most international businesses require a local sponsor for some kind of business. And I'm just going to say it's not hard to find somebody local to jump on board. You pay somebody well enough, they will absolutely sign their name on the dotted line and be your sock puppet. So
it's sort of like the reverse takeover, whatever, with the stock exchange.
There you go.
Just finding a shell to partner with.
Yeah.
So,
but actually, I wanted to back up from when we were getting into the weeds,
we
talking about We do. We like the weeds. But talking about like Rebecca Mercer and all this other stuff, backing out. I mean, like, geez, like, what did you think these billionaires were going to do? These people who,
But Brian, they're just going to donate to your company and they're completely hands off.
Diogenes, the philosopher who liked to live in a giant pot. He said to some other philosopher who is a court philosopher, he said, the court philosopher saw him boiling lentils, and he said, if you learn to flatter the king, you wouldn't have to eat lentils to survive. And Diogenes said, if you learned to boil lentils, you wouldn't have to flatter the king to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, but see, if you're gonna bring up Diogenes, I'm gonna point out that there was an instance where it was claimed that when Plato said that the definition of man is a featherless biped,
it was Aristotle.
Diogenes ran in with a plucked chicken and said, "Behold, I brought you a man."
Yes. So, Diogenes is the
what
true.
What good is critique if you can't also have humor?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Diogenes is like the what is he? He's the dirtbag left of the fucking ancient Greek world. That's Diogenes.
Well, so speaking of the chat though, there was another question. Somebody said, somebody made the point, and I think this was in regards to maybe somebody said, do you think science jargon is sort of weaponized by psychedelic press to make every turn of evidence look like a miracle? Somebody else says that's true of any therapy or support professional, more specific to psychedelic services. I'm not sure if those two things are in conversation, but to the first point, like, absolutely, I think that's a thing that happens. I think this is part of the reason why I wrote the press release article. This is part of the reason we did a podcast on it. I think trying to encourage critical engagement and like real, I mean, for me, my early years in psychedelic spaces were in underground online communities, right? It was hanging out with other drug nerds. It was people who called bullshit when you'd see people who didn't know what they were talking about making all sorts of fantastical claims about psychedelics. Like, yes, psychedelics can do some phenomenal stuff, and also people can go kind of overboard. And I think it's important to remain even keel about that. But with regards of whether or not this happens in any professional space, yeah, it happens in other professional spaces, and I think it's concerning regardless. Part of the reason I wanted to focus on that question for a moment is because that particular line, and I'm not saying this person is doing it at all, but that particular line of engagement, or what I would say disengagement, gets used a lot around issues of sexual abuse in psychedelic spaces, particularly in therapy, where I've had conversations with a number of professionals and practitioners that when you mention that there are these ongoing lineages and issues of abuse and assault and sexual impropriety, they say, well, we have a larger problem with therapists in general who fuck their clients. And yes, that may also be true, but that does not actually address the real and existing harms taking place in psychedelia. So the whataboutism, I mean, it is a bit of a logical fallacy. And I think that there needs to be a willingness to say, yes, that is an issue everywhere else. And perhaps it's an issue in psychedelia because it reflects, our cultures at large. But what can we do about it within psychedelia? Like, if we see other outlets that are making nonsensical claims about psychedelics, if we see people who are trying to promote psychedelics as panaceas, again, this comes back to these questions of communal ethos. And I think we have a bit of an obligation. I would like to imagine we have an obligation to intervene, to interject, it's not comfortable, but to say, hey, wait, I think it might actually be something other than what you're saying. At least broach the conversation.
Sure. And I mean, I agree. Nishay, what are you thinking about? Russell, what are you thinking about?
Hey, Danji's here.
Yeah.
I just want to give a shout out. Let's look at the comments. Look at the comments.
Go for it.
Yeah, Danji is here. I remember, I think we had a great walk back at Psymposia.
Envisioning?
It was envisioning a post-prohibition
I remember going
world.
to the bar. We went to the bar and we hung out with the Arrowids there. It was great.
There was that whole conference really did a lot for sort of crystallizing some of the critiques. I mean, really the critiques that I've brought back, with y'all, that like we've been engaged in, the things I did in the subsequent years, but like seeing at how some of those threads have crystallized and finding myself in orbit and in dialogue with you all around, because, okay, for folks who don't know, the 2015 Psymposia conference was called Envisioning a Post-Prohibition World. And Nishay was talking about coming out of the psychedelic closet. I had a conversation.
That was before the article, I think, came out.
Yeah, before the
that was
series.
sort of like, that was like where that started, like that whole
we launched like as
conversation.
a magazine in 2016.
Well, and we had a conversation and somebody just sent me an image. They found one of the copies of the Nexian that I brought to that.
Oh,
so the DMT Nexus had done a couple of underground publications, and we'd managed to do a print run of the second volume. And I brought a bunch of them to that conference, and somebody just sent me an image of one of them. And I remember, Brian, we had a chat. I think it was after the conference, because you were talking about like wanting to do a magazine. And I was just thinking about what a hassle it had been, not only to coordinate and edit everything behind the scenes, but to then actually print it. And I'm thinking, this guy, he wants to do Jesus Christ, that's going to be a nightmare.
I was going down and sitting at the cafe in downtown Amherst every day, like studying my plant science and just like thinking about this whole space. And there was just like a complete lack. I mean, yeah, there was Reality Sandwich, but there wasn't anything that was out there that was like kind of discussing the things that we wanted to discuss.
And even just real quick, the conferences, it's like the conversations that were happening in the hallways. I used to joke about how the most like the MAPS conference and everything, the old legacy conferences, I'm sorry, their main value was like actually like bringing us together so that we could like meet and like start to communicate and collaborate in the long term. And like that was the most fun
bat
signal to get us together.
Horizons and in psychedelic science.
Yeah, but just like the early conferences especially were very like straight-laced science, where it was like, and stuff that if you've been paying attention to the field, you've like seen before, like literally the same talk or like the paper.
You don't want to hear a presentation on the next FDA approval step of MAPS's MDMA therapy. So
it's like, meanwhile, like in the hallways, like when we would gather from, across the country, around the world, it's like, oh my gosh, have you heard this thing? Like a lot of people wouldn't even like go into the conferences sometimes when it was
I stopped watching the presentations after I think my first
same here. Yeah. You just, you read through the thing and you're like, well, I could probably catch that later. But I mean, so I just want to first of all, fluff up like 3 members of this call right here for personally inspiring me before ever getting involved with Psymposia, because Russell inspires me every day. So I mean, it's just, but in any case, like what I want to say is that like, I got into the sort of public psychedelic space through the Psychedelic Society movement. And I decided to start a psychedelic society in Columbus, Ohio, very much in large part because of Nishay Devanau's coming out of the Psychedelic Closet series, which was published on Psymposia.
And that like wouldn't have happened if you got, because Brian, I feel like it was you that like came to me and was like, hey, like, would you like to do this? You had this idea for this new format, right? With responses.
Hang on, I want to relinquish the stage in one moment. And then Dave Nichols as the mod for DMT Nexus. Let's just say there's really useful, crucial, liberatory information on the DMT Nexus for anyone who is really seeking. And I will say that I personally benefited from the good stewardship that is there, the harm reduction information, and all of that. And so
totally,
when on the conference circuit, I got to meet all 3 of these individuals. I was actually going on the conference circuit because I also was bored by what was being presented. And at the same time, I've been taking psychedelics since, again, the 90s, and was sort of a festy person. And there's a lot going on at festivals, at these transformational, festivals that is worthy, of note, and I didn't see it at the psychedelic. They didn't see it on the stages, and that's all I wanted to say.
Well,
So.
a lot of that is like the dirty side of it, the degenerate side of it. We don't want to really highlight that as much, even though that's the most fascinating.
Even though it's the fucking engine, it's literally what carried the torch in the dark times.
And Dave has a story, but one of the Hopkins people, I just having a real interest in Dave's analysis and the work that he's doing. I find that really interesting. That's like an actual real scientist. Like,
well, that was the thing back in the
underground.
Day. Yeah, we did actual real science.
Totally. So it's not this like bullshit science that's like what appeals to. We're in this like so superficial phase here. It's not about the real science. It's about, what this is? This is we're in the economic botany phase of of things here.
Yep.
We're in the uses of the medicines that enable and propel empire and maintenance and capitalist maintenance therapies. That's where we're at right now. Don't worry about the problems. Don't worry about what's causing addiction, PTSD, suicide, depression. But let's just treat them. Let's not actually get political. Let's not get radical. Let's not get systemic and structural. Let's just treat them, because that's where the money is at. Let's not worry about like we're in a boat, we have a hole in the boat. Let's not worry about the hole in the boat. Let's worry about building like fancy looking scoops, little cups that have like, technology in them that can get the data on the speed that you're scooping and how much the weight is and what the how like that's the system that we're in. And so when we're talking about like all this fucking nonsense about like biometrics and wearables, and it's fucking nonsense. Mushrooms grow out of a pile of shit. You take them, you have an experience. This is fucking nonsense. Like all the loopholes that you have to go through. We were just on a call at someone from a big nonprofit, and he was telling us like the fucking nonsense that they had to go through to get psilocybin to patients.
Yes.
It's wild. It's
The
wild.
bureaucratization of psychedelics is an under-critiqued phenomenon.
It's just I understand the role of the FDA and not putting thalidomide and
I get it.
And all this shit.
Sure.
I understand that. Real important. But like all these sort of derivative technologies and
Nishay wants to say something, and I have a point to that after.
Sure, go ahead. I'm done my tangent.
I was going to say, like, what's ironic is that sometimes even trying to have these conversations, what I would call the like establishment liberal like part of the community is like they'll point to the people who are suffering and need that maintenance therapy as like these people are suffering, like there's real people who are suffering, and they'll act like you're saying we should actually talk about the root causes and the systems and stuff as a distraction from that. And so it's like they won't even like broach the conversation.
No, you know what?
Like,
and you know what? Go ahead, Dave. I don't want to cut you off.
Just real quick about the point of thalidomide and bureaucratization and all that. Yeah, sure. Bureaucratize the shit out of some thalidomide. No objections there whatsoever. There's no scientific or evidentiary basis for any of these compounds to be illegal according to the way they're scheduled in the first place.
No,
so it's
they didn't do any due diligence
it just doesn't hold.
to make them illegal. It was a blanket designation. And the idea that substances that literally the World Health Organization, in the case of psilocybin, has designated as the least harmful of the illicit drugs, should have to jump through all these hoops is ridiculous. But I'm going to talk real fast so that I can point out that Shusha Usha in the comments said, in my opinion, sexual assault while under the influence of psychedelics is basically emotional pedophilia. Like, holy shit. Is that a new term? I think it's very descriptive.
Yeah, I think that is really descriptive. Sorry, I'm struggling to process because I know of some people who were abused and then wound up incredibly regressed. And it's exactly, I mean, like there's something around that feels kind of fitting in those cases. I don't know that that's always the case, let's say. I think regardless, you know, the addition of compounds in those, you know, especially psychedelic compounds in those situations is, it adds a whole other layer to
I
shit.
feel like it's describing something incredibly painfully specific.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, in my only situation of like having, like I had under the influence in ceremony with a father figure of mine specifically. And it was completely because of the father figure dynamic that happened, you know, like it was like central to it. And so I feel like there's definitely like something there. I don't know that it might simplify some aspects of it, but I think there definitely is like that component for sure.
Yeah. There was something I was going to throw out too prior about talking about the CSA and scheduling. If anybody knows, I'm still really curious, and maybe I've just missed it somewhere, about how who knew about Iboga to get it scheduled back then, because that was on like the original list of plants. I'm so curious, and it was scheduled specifically like by the plant. Just a point that's, and not to just blow past the other thing.
No.
There's a huge number of issues with that. I saw earlier in the chat, somebody said, "We stan Lily K. Ross."
Yeah.
So stan Lily
we
K.
do.
Ross.
We stand.
We did a podcast episode with her. Somebody will throw it in the chat. A while back. We hope to do some more work. I mean, unfortunately, this seems to be one of the perennial fucked up issues in the space. And
I think you brought up the fact that the therapist dyad, male female, like it was in the historical record reinstituted after these or whatever, to address like this epidemic of sexual abuse in therapeutic contexts. And the fact that, like, as with Neil Goldsmith, like what happened with Horizons, the fact that it was just quietly, let's not look at this, and like we'll do the stopgap and just like not process what this was as a community, like
sure,
that says a lot.
I'll give them credit. I do give them credit for even putting out a statement and handling it, though.
Yeah, but why is the bar?
No.
You know, the bar has been set low because, you know,
Look, there are the
You're
groups
talking about
that don't
Horizons?
really do much and don't even address it in the first place.
But these are missed opportunities, is my point. It's like,
Yes.
it's like
Totally
not
agree with that.
only
Valid.
is it fucked that this has happened in the past, but we can point to cases where there was an opportunity to be more intentional about processing the problem and like doing things to address it. Even the Quartz article, Olivia wrote about how
Goldhill.
in Rick Doblin's dissertation, he acknowledged the widespread problem of sexual abuse in therapeutic contexts. And then they didn't warn, there was no language about that in the MAPS trials within which someone had something happen to them. And so the point being, like, there's this knowledge and this like lack of having formally kind of processed publicly what something, and also just the effects of having Neil there for so long. And like that hasn't been dealt with. People haven't been able to like make amends for all the really shitty, like even Lily being gone for so long, like that sucks that had to happen.
So we've got some other questions coming in. There's one that I want to address because it's kind of slipped up, and I'm going to address this in a roundabout way because they've asked about Dennis McKenna being on the advisory boards of a few things. And somebody else asked what Terrence would think. And, you know, I'm not going to speak for what other people might think.
Especially those who are no longer with us.
We've frequently commented, though, when we look at the current state of institutional psychedelia, right? The fact that institutional psychedelia is even a thing. And we think about some of the anti-institutional critiques and the questions of like questioning authority and all of these sort of, as Pace put it earlier, right? The psychedelic canon and what things have, you know, what sort of themes and memes have been part of psychedelic subculture over the decades, over, you know, in various generations. I think people are making the decisions that they're making for a variety of reasons. There's, as Normie brought up earlier, there's a reason that people are looking to get paid. People are looking for opportunities to
Is the reason
in.
Capitalism?
It may be.
I think it's capitalism.
And like, look, like I for me, like, I would be curious what those people say about their decisions if asked about that. And I think that we should be having, like, these should be transparent conversations. I think that, like, if you find figures who have made, for me, when I look at the boards of a number of companies, there are a handful of people who I was surprised to see functioning in advisory roles for sketchy companies.
Agreed.
And like, I think when you see those people at the next talk you see them at, virtual or, you know, should there start to be real world, you know, in-person conferences and the like, ask them about it. Like, I think, like, holding people accountable doesn't need to be some scary, you know, sort of retributive justice model or whatever. Like,
no, it's like, hey, I'm really looking to understand, like, your reasoning here, because I respect you and I'm finding this to be incongruous with things that you've said in the past. And
maybe they say, look, it was, they offered me 50 grand. They offered me, hell, we knew of people who were getting offered.
And, you know, and to those who accepted the 50 grand, I say, I absolve you of doing so if you just are honest about it.
I'm not going to say, you know, like,
I don't absolve, but I just,
I was going to say, because I know people who have taken very low amounts of payments. To me, it's like, you can't get, like, I think back to Arthur Miller's The Crucible, right? And there's this moment, it's a book dealing with, like, witch hunts and the like, and
Daniel Day-Lewis.
They're asking this guy, well, I didn't see that. Well, we did watch the film. Sorry, this is like 8th grade. This is fucking ages ago. But the one thing that stuck with me, there's a passage where they try to get this guy to sign a confession to, like, you know, furthering witchcraft or something. And they tell him to just sign it and it'll save him and this, that, and the other. And he refuses, and they ask him why. And he says, because it's my name and I cannot have another. And like, for me, like,
rocks.
Huh?
And then he gets crushed by rocks.
Yeah, you know, look, if any authority figure is pressuring you and also has physical custody of your body and says, just sign right here and confess, don't do that. It never turns out well.
I want to say something on Dennis. Dennis has been one of the nicest guys. Like,
Dennis is a
biggest sweethearts in this space, and Psymposia wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dennis, because I met my the other co-founder, Brett Green, who has gone on to do some of the corporate stuff. But Brett actually was the person who really was like the kernel. Brett had gone to Nashay's conference, Psychedemia, and I went to Horizons the following year, and Brett approached me and he's like, hey, meet Dennis. Like, we're going to do a conference at UMass. And then I worked with Dennis actually at a 2017 conference, the Ethnopharmacologic something on psychoactive drugs, ESPD. But Dennis is a really great, really good person. We've looked into Entheon Biomedical before, but they were doing like DMT related stuff. Is that right? Sorry to put you on the spot. They haven't been one of the ones that we've been really following super closely. So Ali, I don't have many more thoughts on that other than, other than that,
it is hard to kind of watch him get into the more corporate crowds, but I can kind of second what you said, Brian. And as a like college student, I think Dennis was one of the first sources in kind of the psychedelic world that I ever reached out to. And he was incredibly forthcoming just for like an 18-year-old college student or whatever, like, and would tell me tons. And he was like, really helped me get interested in all of this. So
super supportive, like give everybody
as an advisor,
time.
You couldn't ask for much better of a
That's true. Dennis McKenna is a pure soul. He's a great soul, I would say. And I too, like, had an experience where my first psychedelic conference was specifically to see Dennis McKenna speak.
That was the Iboga one in Mexico.
It is the Global Ibogaine conference in Tepoztlan, Mexico. I was living in Mexico at the time, and I was like, oh, that's like an 8-hour bus trip, which in Mexico is not that big of a deal.
But you were down in were you in Chiapas?
All of my research for my PhD was in Chiapas, which is a super super duper psychedelic place, by the way. Yeah, I'd literally just rolled down the hill from an all-night peyote ceremony. There was a visiting Murakami who was invited by the local Maya. And the next day I got on a bus, ended up in Tepo's lawn, and not only like saw Dennis, speak on really well on plant intelligence from a really solid basis. Talking, I'm a plant biologist, a plant evolutionary ecologist by training, and he wasn't speaking nonsense. He was making good arguments. He's an ethnopharmacologist.
If we're gonna talk plant intelligence, I'm like not in that real thing at all, but it's fun to think about.
Again, like I'm not talking about my positions. I'm talking about whether or not somebody.
But I will say,
a good argument.
If you have not read any of Dale Pendle's work,
Dale Pendle is a fucking giant.
Phenomenal. It's the best. Wonderful. It's singular.
Yeah. He's great. But real quick, to close, I went to this conference, and not only did I get to see somebody who, was, somebody like that I had a lot of respect for and knew his legacy for. Yes, there you go. I don't want to get up and go 2 feet that way to get my copies. I ended up spending the weekend like chatting with him and having a couple meals with him, and it was just he's a really like open, friendly guy.
Totally.
Well, look,
this is great.
2013 MAPS conference, where I was giving a presentation on phytochemical analysis from the DMT Nexus, Dennis was hugely supportive. We wound up having this huge long chat. I mean, I had wound up chatting with Andrew Sewell on the MAPS cruise over to whatever sort of the rave or whatever was happening that night, and sort of all the kids got off and the researchers were all on. And on the way back, I wound up in this huge long chat with Dennis, and he was immensely supportive of the kind of work we were doing. And then, the next day, like he showed up at the talk, was like, I was nervous as hell. I had food poisoning from the cruise, was just a total wreck. I'll spare you all the details, but he shows up at the beginning of the chat talk and is like cracking jokes and like put me totally at ease. I think he asked like the first question in the Q&A, and just like that sort of support. I mean, including like the OG Hopkins folks. I mean, I remember, meeting Mary Casamano at Psychedemia in 2012, and she doesn't know who the hell I am. She gives me this huge hug and it's like, thanking me for sharing the analytical work we've done.
Mary's always been really great and supportive of some and she's
yeah. And I think so this is the thing though. I think also like having these relationships with these folks. I mean, we've had behind the scenes discussions with a number of folks, trying to let them know, hey, these people look concerning, maybe stay away from them. If people reach out and ask us questions about what we think of some of the people who've sent them requests for engagement or advising, to serve on their advisory boards or what have you, like we're happy to share the information that we've got on anyone, especially, with people who are making decisions about to support and give legitimacy. And part of the reason we're in the position we're in with Compass and the rest is that MAPS lent their legitimacy to Compass and allowed them to really get a whole bunch of access that they really wouldn't have been able to get otherwise, in my opinion. And so to the extent that we can share some of the insight that we have, we're happy to do it, I think. I mean, I am.
I just want to point out.
And there's a question from Danji.
I was just going to point out that Matt Baggett liked my economic botany comment.
Indeed. Solid endorsement. Yeah. So Danji says, David, you're talking. Well,
I'm sure I'll be right back.
Yeah, he's probably dealing with some baby stuff. So he says, David, your talk back then I'm assuming he means envisioning the Symposia conversation, proposed abolitionist solidarity with prisoners emerging from psychedelia's relation to the state and drug war. How does this relate to 2020, the virus, the rebellion, and abolish the police? So
earlier, that's great though, for like just as another like point or like data point on like how long you've been making the same points for, you know?
Well, the thing that cracks me up is that I feel like I've been beating the same horse, you know, dead horse for years. That like literally at times I'm like, fuck, like I'm just saying the same things over and over and over. And granted, the context changes and there's new components, but like, so yeah, so going back to the 2015 Psymposia conference, envisioning a post-prohibition world, I had already been giving like social and political critiques up to that point, but getting the framework of like imagining, okay, prohibition is over, drugs are accessible or decriminalized or legal, but everything else has stayed the same. Now what changes? And in that talk, which is available on my YouTube, I can link that. But it proposed that we should expect to see, because for-profit prisons are a thing, because like capitalism is the context in which we exist. It proposed the notion that like people who are looking to profit off of the carceral practices would just look to find additional prisoner populations, and that I suspected that we would see a potential spike in immigrant detention facilities. And sure enough, like it was, I mean, and I want to be clear, this is correlation, not causation, but like, to me, it was particularly striking that I think it was like the same day that Canada's legislative body was signing cannabis legalization, or you know, was signing laws changing the status of cannabis. Trump was signing some order to expand the incarceration of immigrants. Yeah. And like, to me, it's like, okay, so we've seen that, and we've seen, and I've been, and Russ is probably going to laugh, I've been trying for months to get out this sort of rough sketch conceptual series
every week
dealing with,
tells me, hey, I got some time this weekend. I'm gonna work on the conceptual.
Yeah, and then somebody else needs something
There's like
edited.
8 pieces laid out there. I get it.
So I'm the managing editor, but I can't even manage my own life.
Tell me about it, man.
And I'm trying to deal with things in that series, dealing with like capitalism, surveillance capitalism. It was actually started before the uprisings kicked off, but after the pandemic, trying to look at psychedelics in the context of pandemic. Now it's been expanded to psychedelics in the context of pandemic and uprising, issues of industrial capitalism. But to try to address the question a bit more, right? If we're talking about psychedelia in relation to the state and the drug war, and sort of, if we look at where we're at now with issues of the pandemic and rebellion against the police, to me, when I look at my own life, and I've told this story in various formats, so I won't do it at the moment, but my first mushroom trip, as Nishay alluded to earlier, was like hugely instrumental in developing some of the analyses of capitalism and industrial civilization, and sort of getting a glimpse that, holy shit, there are these massive systems that intersect in ways that incentivize and produce and reproduce certain behaviors. And that like, it's not enough, like getting a glimpse of those systems, it's like, okay, now there's a need to deconstruct those systems. And that led me to a decade plus living and organizing in radical and anarchist spaces. So for me, when I look at psychedelia, and part of the reason that like I'm involved with Psymposia and give the talks that I've given and publish and the rest of it, is because to me, there is that catalytic potential. Like there is this potential for insight. There is this potential to like sort of, I don't want to say it's a shortcut, but like to really quickly crystallize and synthesize certain realizations. And we can talk about, you know, nature consciousness or the things that sort of fall out of realizing how dependent and reliant we are on the land base as animals, right? And so recognizing that I think these things still function as catalysts, can function as catalysts, trying to, and this also goes back to the DIY approach, trying to figure out how we can share the compounds, share the experiences, and share the ethos that encourages realizations about what are we here to do in the first place. And Pace has heard me rant against some of the psychedelic societies, and I don't mean it as an attack on him or his efforts with psychedelic societies at all.
Well, I take it that way, and I'm going to fucking fight you, so I don't know what
cool. Well,
do.
next time we're in the same space.
And particularly, I take issue with, no, go on.
No, but seriously, like the fact that psychedelic societies for the sake of navel gazing, or like psychedelics for the sake of psychedelics, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. Like,
yeah.
I think the questions that come up with psychedelics should be questions of like, what is the point of this human experience that we have? How are we organizing? What are our social relations? And I want
to comment on that, because actually we got into some of that. I teach a psychedelic studies course at the Ohio State University. And in the discussion today, our lecture was on decriminalization. And there was a question about, well, okay, so I mean, like, Oregon has decriminalized all drugs. What now? I mean, like, let's game this out. What happens when the United States decriminalizes all drugs? You know, or even legalizes them, but like, we didn't get there yet. But like, point being, what happens when an entire huge industry is no longer criminalized? And we literally went, Brian, Normie, you'll be incredibly pleased that yes, I went through the current statistics on who's in prison for drugs, and currently that's about 500,000 people across federal and state. There's a million.
Sure, but
for violent crime.
Even with the people who were in there for drugs,
right?
It was like they might have been in there for some sort of violent crime or gun crime.
Yes,
get them on the drug charge too.
Right,
it's really hazy.
It's squishy, but the raw numbers are. We still have to deal with the fact that our entire society has a very punitive way. That as Angela Davis said, you know, prisons don't disappear social problems; they disappear human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And COVID is telling us that those human beings don't actually go away, that they are still a part of our communities, because even if you don't care about those people that we threw away, we threw away the key after we locked them up. Well, who's monitoring them? Those people are exposed. The jailers, the literal jailers, are a go-between between the prisons and you know, these hotbeds for COVID. So look, we're all connected. This is a sort of a classic psychedelic realization, but it's also just like an ecological fact. And I'm not trying to lose the plot here, but I'm saying, like, what happens when we win? Well, you know what happens when we win is we stop spending so much fucking money on domestic and international terrorism of people who use drugs and people who produce drugs. I realize that it's an engine for the secret police. They look, it's demonstrable. You go back to Air America. The secret polices use certain aspects of illegal drug trade to fund their activities.
Air America, isn't that the thing that Al Franken was?
No, silly. Oh, thank you for playing my role. Yeah, Air America was a CIA-funded airline that flew heroin out of the Golden Triangle, out of Vietnam and Laos, Burma. They stuffed heroin in the bodies of returning soldiers. U.S. soldiers.
So if I can, for a moment,
look at this guy bringing up the archives.
Sorry, I brought up this old slide. This one.
Are you sharing screen?
I've used it in a bunch of talks. This one I pulled out of a talk called "Ethical Considerations for Dosing the Water," and
don't do it. It's a bad idea.
The caption is drug-induced politics, right?
Yeah.
And for me, this is just as true in 2020 as it was in 2015. And so in looking through the psychedelic literature, right, and looking through the trip reports, we find these themes, right? Notions like love is all there is, that you are complete, the significance of ecological integrity, the importance of play and connection. If we wanted to take the hippy dippy sort of Beatles notion, that I am you and you are me and we are all together. right? But then if you take those themes and you actually map them on to capitalism and you look at how we exist in the world, our social structures, our institutions, you know, when we see that love is all there is and you are complete, that has to compete with all of the trillions of dollars in ads spent telling you that you're unlovable and incomplete, right?
How does it do in that competition?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's a pretty hard message to hold on to once, again, you hit the realities of what it takes to secure food, clothes, and shelter.
Yeah, no, I mean, but this is something that you and I have gone back and forth on a little bit, because I've argued specifically against the idea of a drug-induced politics.
Totally. But this is, so when I say that there's this catalytic potential, you know, like for me,
yeah.
When you hear, so if you have an experience of the significance of ecological integrity, you know, for me, the conclusion was to look at industrial civilization results in ecocide and how do we grapple with that? What do we do? Now, you could just as easily, well, maybe not you, one might just as easily come to some sort of eco-fascist conclusion, like the El Paso, Texas shooter, right? Who starts saying, well, you know, industrial civilization equals ecocide, so we need less brown people. Right? This is not to say that there is an inherent political bent to this, but that we can create a drug-induced politics. So when we see the importance of play and connection, and then we see commodified social relationships, labor relationships, what do we do about that, right? It's not that psychedelics answer the question, right? When we see these connections and then realize that capitalism results in atomization, like, the way that we approach those problems, the way that we decide to start troubleshooting, that's where we build sort of the politics. That's where we have the potential for collaboration, for cooperation. That's where, you know, one of the things Matt Baggett also raised in the chat questions is he's pointing out that, like, we have a bunch of psychedelic elders who have had these rather lofty ideals, who Sasha Shulgin didn't go out and create a whole bunch of patented alphabetamines that he could sell for profit, right? And when we look at his last years and we look at the fundraising that went into to providing and caring and trying to help with the efforts, when we look at what still has to be done as far as archiving all of the incredible things that the Shulgins and their cohort brought into the world, like, there's a fucking huge endeavor to do there, right? And so I think recognizing that why these people are being pulled in directions towards securing themselves economically, but recognizing that the system and the games that need to be played in order to have that security within the system are predicated on the suffering of others, to me indicates that we should shift the system, and ideally not towards fascism, not towards some sort of dictatorial monarchy, ideally, right? But towards people are saying acid communism, acid anarchism. You know, I'll shut up for a moment.
Well, yeah, I actually have to give communism a shout out to a couple of students of mine who've shown up in the live stream. So thank you for joining us, y'all. These are students of OSU, plant pathology. What's the full title? Neurochemicals, Plants, Fungi, and Society. And these characters have been like making me work my ass off for like the last several months, and have really helped me like refine my game. Like, unfortunately, the next cohort is going to benefit from all the mistakes I made this term, but yeah, I've made them write a bunch of stuff and read a bunch of stuff, and it's just really been a fucking pleasure. In any case, yeah, like what Dave was talking about, though, I want to say I felt and have experienced many of the things that Dave is referencing, but I don't think any of us would be here having this conversation if there weren't other people in the space who had a big acid trip and said, how do I turn this into a fucking app that's going to make me $5 million? That's just a reality. And like, look, I've been to Burning Man and I've several times, like, that is a space where a bunch of like people who have wildly different worldviews and political stances take a lot of different substances. I'm sure many of them more than I ever have or will. To alter their consciousness and their idea of play. I mean, geez, have you ever played with somebody whose play was a little too rough? You know, So I mean, it's a wild world out there, and I don't want to.
That's the win-win club, right?
Well, yeah.
That's the
if such a
win-win club.
if such a
Scale
thing
down,
exists,
make the world
yeah.
a better place.
No, totally. You're referencing some things that we've talked about in the past, but like, I'm very keen on like owning and defining our ethos. Something, Dave, you're incredibly astute at doing, and in fact, everybody on this call does a really good job of just like living the ethos that you like adopt. And to me, that's fantastic. Like you have gathered through your experience and through your work and through the way that the world has hit you in some way, you know, an approach, a response. And I just don't like, I don't like seeing people giving away that power to a mystical experience that is as far as I understand it, amplifying what's already there. It's amplifying your consciousness, you know? And I mean, like, we've talked about this on the podcast and individually, and also when we're talking about like, you know, the clinical and medical use of psychedelics and how wild it is and how important it is to talk about the different parameters that go into the psychedelic experience, because it matters. But yeah, I'm as much as I've had like a lot of benefits from these experiences, like I don't know how to make somebody have my experience, and I don't think I would want to. I do want people to get something beautiful out of it, but in my humble opinion, that's mostly facilitated by getting the fuck out of the way.
Well,
And
that's what I was going to say though. Like if you like forget having somebody else having your experience, like, and Nishay likes to bring up the anti-boot messaging, right? The anti-authoritarianism, the sort of non-coercive, like, you know, if you go out and Russ has pointed this too, you know, you go out with some friends and you take some drugs in nature and you kind of hang out and talk about the ideas that come up. I mean, maybe that particular experience happens to just be like a bunch of giggling and like pure neurochemical art, and you just enjoy it and enjoy each other's company. And maybe there is, I mean, and you can absolutely, I speak from personal experience, make political analysis from that, but maybe there is none, right? And like, and then at the same time, maybe there are some.
Sorry, I'm laughing.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
I'm laughing about a completely.
God damn it!
Well,
in my head.
Just real quick, the or maybe like somebody starts to ask questions, and it's the kind of thing where like, and maybe you have the whole giggle fit, and then there's some unpacking after. But like, I think holding the space for that, right, recognizing that this is a potential and having at least some of that intentionality around it, to me, like it offers, if we're going to say like, well, what are we going to do about this in 2020 with pandemic and police uprisings and this, that, and the other? Like, we've talked about the degree to which we've seen ossification and stagnation from psychedelic institutions at the same time that they're talking about how psychedelics promote all this openness and creativity and what have you. And I think rather than saying psychedelics will offer the solution, right, to me, it seems like a more anarchic question about how do we be in the world, right? How do we, rather than looking to some distant promise of once we can make this $15,000+ therapy accessible to everyone, then we will have the mental health revolution we expect. It's nonsense, right? Rather, it should be, to my mind, what seems to be a more anarchic practice of how do we find liberation in this moment? Like
now, yeah,
right.
I agree.
How can
and if there is a politics of psychedelics, and I have given various caveats to my own critique of this whole thing, and I can point to two. One, time. Many people in the psychedelic world have said that all the drugs that are available to us now, because there are many drugs, there are no people who take no drugs. Everybody takes some drugs, even if your drug is sleep deprivation and exercise, and like, I don't know, self-abuse or onanism.
Or just like the chocolate sugar coffee, like
there you go.
ones.
That's the classic trifecta.
Yeah.
But you know, like, yes, everybody takes the drugs and they say, oh, these are the drugs that make you work, you know. Psychedelics take a lot of time. They take a lot of time to before you're functional as a worker, and if you're doing it right, they take even more time to like integrate that which happened to you, whether or not you have enlisted a professional to help you with that or not. Two would be, that the insight, the real psychedelic insight that happens, that is like a hot knife that cuts through everyday reality. It can't be denied. It's an epistemological.
It's a black hole tear in space and time.
Yeah.
Put simply.
And that is, if we're to, somebody referenced acid communism in the comments, and that was the unfinished project of Mark Fisher, somebody who I have a great amount of esteem for. And capitalist realism, which was the finished work of Mark Fisher, said that capitalist realism is the idea that you cannot imagine anything outside of capitalism. And I'm just going to say that the experience of the psychedelic, bolt of lightning, noetic thermonuclear bomb that can happen. It doesn't always happen, but can happen. If it happens to you, there's no going back. There's no going back to the regular world where, only that which is in front of you is possible.
That's like Plato's cave, right?
Yeah.
Like you suddenly go back to the cave and you're like, oh shit, there are all these like pictures here from the shadows. Like, and I mean, I'm personally interested. I'm not advocating anything for anyone, but I mentioned I would not be qualified. I'd be a pre-existing whatever for therapeutic trials.
Contraindication.
Contraindication. Yeah. Thanks. And in my personal experience, like, having this kind of welcoming in the context of like the Rainbow Gathering or something where there's like lateral communities and power structures and things, just like people coming together to support one another in like the middle of the woods, like that kind of like, whoa, like this is so different from everything that I assumed life to be. And just being able to cultivate that. That's how speaking of PKD, like that's how I read the metaphor of like the man in the high castle. Like things could be otherwise. Like that realization is powerful.
That single realization is transformational. And that is undeniable. And I will never deny that.
And kind of just in terms of like plugging psychedelic studies, because I teach psychedelic literature classes, and that's a big piece of like what I do is like reading these stories that sort of like describe that phenomenon. And like it works in the classes, even with like college freshmen who have never taken psychedelics. Like it has that same kind of effect. And that's an aspect of psychedelic experience that's not explored in this like field trip discourse around like medicalization.
Nishay,
well, hang on.
I want to stop quick, right there. Having read my students' responses,
I thought you were on the air.
Read my students' responses to Nishay's talk, they do respond. They do see. There is a response to somebody, walking them through, these words, these narratives that are both echoes and guides through altered states of consciousness. And Nishay's a good fucking teacher.
Can I just stress that like under capitalism, like I'm broke and not on health insurance during pandemic. So when people like Ronan Levy come around and say,
not on health insurance and broke on a pandemic. Right.
And it's like, so when people like Ronan Levy and the capitalists come by and say like, hey, capitalism allows everyone to be free and do what they want to do.
It's a great method to scale things, but
it's just, it is, but I just have to say like,
hold on. There's a few things to say. He's being facetious. Normie is quoting Michael Pollan at Horizons.
No, I'm not.
Well, you're unintentionally quoting Michael Pollan at Horizons saying capitalism is a great way to scale, which I thought was a shitty response.
I'm going to look at our signal chat and I'm going to bring up media.
Anyway, the other thing is, as far as Ronan goes, I think the point that you're making though, Nishay, like this issue, when he comes on there with you and Eric Davis and says, whoa, I just wasn't expecting this level of thought. You guys have ideas and these issues. You've been sitting with them for like, you clearly like engaged with them for a while. And it's like, right, because you've only been at these corporate sponsored PR events. Like you haven't actually engaged with the sort of ideological lineages of the space that you're attempting to enter in and make yourself an expert on the back of the money that you're bringing. Like that's not, money can buy you a whole lot of things, but it can't really buy you expertise. I mean, it can buy you the illusion.
That's why you have Tim Ferriss.
Right.
I was actually quoting, and I found this through Googling conscious capitalism, Dr. Bronner's. I was actually quoting Chris Lynn Bronner, who's the strategic advisor and CSR manager at Dr. Bronner's. I found this recently. The quote is, capitalism is this really powerful engine for innovation, for organizing with people. The question is, how do we protect ourselves from capitalism while deriving the benefits of it? So yes, and Michael Pollan did say that capitalism is a really powerful engine for scaling things.
Just imagine like reading that quote with like slavery is like a powerful method for organizing.
That's what I was
people.
going to
Like,
say.
it's crazy.
It's true, but it's still slavery.
And I know he's been canceled, but Louis C.K. brought up, made this point of like, how have all of the, when you look at all of the wonders of the world, when you look at the pyramids and you look at the train tracks running through mountains, like how it was all achieved through atrocities, right? Like you had large amounts of expendable human labor and you just threw it at it, and you threw people into these mountains and you blew them up, and like, who gives a fuck what the human cost was, right? You achieved your endeavor, the great technological endeavor. Like, yeah, fucking capitalism is a great machine if you don't think about the body count. Like, and this is one of the things for me, and I'd like to see it's in the conceptual sketch that'll probably be out by 2022. But like, like industrial civilization and psychedelics, right? Like when we talk about therapy, what is the body count? How many people have been abused? How many people have been silenced? How many people have been told that like getting the field of psychedelic therapy to market, to scale, is more important than the fact that they were abused, assaulted, treated these ways by notable psychedelic figures, right? Like if we can't unpack the human cost, if my healthcare requires people mining rare earth minerals and refining them in China, people who are never going to get benefits of those healthcare technologies, to me, that's not truly a liberatory technology. To me, as much as it might secure my healing, and I say this as somebody who's had ACL surgery, right? Like I've benefited from industrial healthcare. And also I recognize that there is a huge cost to the healthcare that I've benefited from. And I don't know, like, if we're not able to have those discussions in psychedelic spaces, if we're not able to like grapple and wrestle and at least begin to like take the lid off and ask the questions, I don't know that there's a whole lot of hope for us.
No, but that speaks to the level of sort of sophistry that is present in the space. And it's like, okay, so you're a neuroscientist or maybe an anthropologist or an ethnobotanist, and you study psychedelics, but perhaps you don't really follow these other things. And look, ego is a thing. It affects us all, but we should never stop like trying to learn from one another. And I would say that like I've spent a lot of time in what I just called poor countries, but other people would call like the global South,
the so-called third world.
Sure. And the fact of the matter is that like real people live where resources are extracted from and where toxic waste is dumped. Whole communities live on the edges of the waste and externality of the global economy. And I cannot forget that which I've seen, because that's my experience of the world. And I also can't shut the fuck up about it. So I'm sorry if some of the things that I bring up in conversation about the bonanza of commercializing indigenous technology is inconvenient and uncouth and impolite, while we want to put a nice coat of shellac on the whole biz.
I'm going to put Russ on the spot.
Please.
Because he just did this phenomenal series dealing with mining and extractive industry players coming into psychedelia. And one of the things that I found really interesting, because I've been doing my best to sort of share the series both as an entire series and as far as like the individual pieces here and there. So, you know, at one point I shared the list of extractive players or the big and dandy list of extractive industry psychedelic pharma ties. And somebody commented on the list and said, oh, like I actually, until I'm naively or shown to be naively incorrect about this, I'm going to take this as evidence that this is actually going to change their mind and help like result in positive outcomes. And I went ahead and just linked them to the other articles that Russ had already written that they hadn't even bothered, you know, they'd been linked to the one, it had the links to the other series. They hadn't even bothered to look and had explicitly said, like, I know I might be wrong about this. I'm probably wrong about this, but I'm going to choose to look at this as probably drumming up some good in the world, which like, in a way I can kind of appreciate it. Like, you know, like, cool. I'm glad that there's this desire towards optimism. And also like thinking about you talking, Pace, about where the pipeline comes out. And Russ, you did a bit of a deep dive into the really existing on the ground realities of the communities dealing with the extractive industry results. And you got to talk with Thea Riofrancos from the Democratic Socialists of America for a Green New Deal. And like, I'm just curious as to your thoughts, like when you see these players barreling in, like what kind of questions stick out for you as far as the future of psychedelic medicine, whether it's Field Trip or any of these other players that are involved in this weird web? Well, sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay. I've been nice and quiet anywhere. Up here. Now I get on the spot. Well, somebody in the comments brought up like nature awareness and psychedelics, and that's sort of where my basis for that series came from, was feeling like, oh, I've had this connection to nature through psychedelics and the world around me and the value of it. And so just knowing that all of this is kind of being built on the backs of industries that are exploiting this is disturbing and contradictory to me in a lot of ways. And it just makes me question the integrity of the people who are getting into this space. It makes me question the integrity of what their purpose is. If the purpose has been exploiting this beautiful resource that we have in the world around us up to this point, why should I expect anything different from them exploiting psychedelics? Why should I expect that psychedelics are going to change their mind about that? And from the characters
you had conversations with people, right? Like the sense, like some of the messages you would send as you were getting emails from these people. Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, and they were just, I mean, it was just the money's in psychedelics right now.
You literally
said to me,
yeah, you got
cannabis is dried up now, then nobody's and there's not a lot of money in it. There's money in the psychedelics. That's why we're here. And they started out as a mining company. I don't think that psychedelics are going to change people's minds.
Russell,
who have already invested in that area.
Russell, did anyone
invested in anything exploitative like that? Sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, it's fascinating, and I do want you to continue. I just was curious. Did anyone reference their personal experience with psychedelics? These investors and VC people that you were speaking to.
Yeah. I mean. And that's the thing, is a lot of them will talk to you about how they think it's changed them for the better. Mm-hmm. And that's great. Christian Angermeyer will talk about how much he's benefited from his mushroom trips, but he still came out of his mushroom trips thinking about how can I make this into a business. And like,
this is something I've been thinking about recently. Just to point out, like Matt Baggett pointed out, like some of the elders in the space and how they've struggled.
Yeah.
Christian Angermeyer through the Compass IPO profited
Over
$316
$400 million.
Well, maybe since
Over 400 now.
Yeah.
That's
I
what
remember
the
when
Sifted article that I just shared with you guys said. It said he profited over $400 million from it.
That's the Sifted article where they credit him for the psychedelic renaissance.
Total,
right?
Correct.
But listen, total fucking propaganda. That's what that is. It's total counter-revolutionary fucking horseshit.
But tell us how you really feel.
That got me pissed off. That got me pissed off. That got me real pissed off reading when you sent to the Signal chat like some of his quotes in that article, Russell. What a joke.
Christian Angermeyer challenged Psymposia to a debate, by the way.
Yeah, you know what he said in that debate? My comments are gonna have a
age well.
My assertion that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin will save us from the pandemic, that's gonna age well.
Yeah.
Well,
we
published, if you think about what happened with Theranos, the like blood company, like that was like valued at like billions of dollars, and the founder lady was supposed, I forget her name, was Elizabeth Holmes. She was supposed to be worth like the youngest self-made billionaire, but it turned out it was actually like a house of cards that was based on speculation. It's like if they could follow through with what they claimed that they could do, then they would be worth that much, but like they couldn't the whole time. So it was actually not real money. There's sort of a similar thing with Compass in the sense, and the companies like them, where like there's this, the total global health, mental health like impact in terms on the economy, and just like all the numbers of PTSD. And like if you speculate forwards that, they're going to have some kind of like prominent role in this like lucrative market, then suddenly it's like, jump on that ship early, but it's not guaranteed. And like, the problem with some certain decrim and more activist models is that it jeopardizes the foundations upon which they are that lucrative, like unicorn,
There's a reason that certain people in the space have already exited, right? There's a reason that people have sold their companies and have profited handily off of them, and in some cases are on to like building their next companies. Like, that pays, and they don't have to worry about whether or not the companies they've sold succeed. And if we think about Angermeyer, we know is a liar. We've got him on the record. We have the RiboPharma co-founder saying, no, Christian Angermeyer is not a co-founder of RiboPharma. We've got the old, I pulled up the Wayback Machine.
Later.
I pulled up the Wayback Machine archives of the old RiboPharma website that show that he was not a co-founder. He's listed there as like a board member or something. And this is in one of Russell's articles.
And to clarify, he was a young dude who helped the company get in touch with a lot of venture-backed people. But in all of his bios online, he claims to be a co-founder. It's disputed.
Look, Angermeyer and Atai presents alternative facts.
I just want to say this.
You have to deal with those alternative facts.
Yeah, alternative facts that they're trying to scale up to 300 million plus people, right, to treat their treatment-resistant depression.
Horseshit. This guy has done nothing for the space other than put his money in this like pool, okay? And then you have like actual heroes of Sasha Shogun and Dennis McKenna who have actually dedicated their lives to the knowledge and, just all that. Like, it makes me furious. It actually makes me furious that there's articles coming out about him now that are like, oh, those dusty hippies. Dusty hippies that
how many dusty hippies put on a lab coat and like actually made this happen? Like, when you start probing around on the people who have done the research, and this is something else, and we've talked about it on past podcasts, but like, we're not against psychedelic science. I know people view us, and me particularly, as like some sort of cynical asshole who's like anti-psychedelic science or whatever. Like, there are really fucking interesting questions. And I think like Eleusis, looking at Chuck Nichols, like when I saw the article, the John Hanna and I'm forgetting his co-author on it. It's another person in the Shulgin orbit. The article that they did on the original discovery of the anti-inflammatory potential of DOI, that shit is fascinating.
So
just when you look at the mechanisms and the fact that all of the the inflammation researchers involved thought that like there was no possible way that such a large molecule was going to be active and work in those ways. And that, you know, you have this serendipity between father and son. Son doesn't want to throw out the cell culture, says, hey, can you help me out? Can you send me anything, literally anything? And you've got the father saying, no, I can send you some DOI. It's not going to do shit. You know, sure enough, he sends it and you find this huge potential. Like, that's fascinating. And probing that to find out what's going on, to me, represents all of these scientific potentials. And I think that seeing good work come out of that would be phenomenal. But instead, seeing the CEO Shlomi Raz, you know, in an attempt, I would contend, in an attempt to like fluff up his relevance, pump up his company's value potentially in the future, make statements about the traditional use of psychedelics being as anti-inflammatory compounds. I mean,
and then trying to twist Richard Evan Schulte's like field work.
Hang on.
We had
so
5 experts, real quick. We had 5 experts willing to go on the record saying it was bullshit, plus a bunch of people off record saying it was bullshit. Like, sorry, go ahead, Pace.
I was gonna say, like, you know, we've had a wide ranging conversation tonight, and I think we've touched on the personal and the political. But one of the things that I think, you know, sort of touches on how there's a disconnect between these like 100 million IPOs and FDA clinical trials, and then like people's experience of psychedelics, something that you know, Nishay is actually an expert in. People like talking about their experience of having certain altered states of consciousness. And I just wanted to bring it back real quick to like how the coming out of the closet, like, you know, series, how did that come to be? I mean, I said earlier, it personally impacted me.
Yeah, I was just interested in hearing, because Normie said like there, because it was sort of like you reached out, I think, to ask about like, hey, what do you think about doing a series or whatever, like conversation on the site. But the reason I was interested in it was just to like bring it back to just the group dynamic that we have. And it's funny, like people call us toxic, but and yet we have this like really healthy, like amazing, like group work ethics together. And just like there are projects that really come into the world because of like joint efforts in ways that like we couldn't have done. Like even Normie, like having Psymposia, you know, going when our podcast came to be, for example, and just being able to kind of like plug it in and launch off. Like we each have different pieces of stuff that have been able to come together as we've worked together. So just like as we relaunch our Patreon and stuff like that, just wanted to mention that as like kind of what the funding like goes towards. Or right now it's mostly just like upkeep with the site. But Normie, I was curious just what the genesis of that story was, or like how you came up with it.
Series?
Yeah, like your idea for it.
I know the exact thing. It's great. It's one of the best times of my life. I would go to a cafe in downtown Amherst. If anybody's been to downtown Amherst, they know it's just a little tiny little town. And I go sit at the cafe, and I would like go drink coffee there every day, and became like good friends with Dorian Sagan there, and we'd like shoot the shit on like cosmic space time and evolution. Like
Dorian Sagan, who is the progeny of
Lynn Margulis and Carl Sagan. And it was just the best. It was very psychedelic and it was super cool. And he taught me a lot. And there was a bookstore that was around the corner, and I went into the bookstore randomly one day, and I picked up a copy of the Boston Magazine, and it was with I think it was a professor. It was a professor. I think his name was Robert Pollan. It was like a socialist, kind of like green guy, on like kind of like a prototype Green New Deal back in 2016 type thing. And the layout that they had in the magazine was really interesting. He wrote a multiple, 5,000 word essay on what his position was. And then he commented on whatever, economics, nuclear technology, this. And
then the publishers took that essay and they sent it around to experts in the field, and they wanted the experts to comment on that piece. And then they published their responses, and then the primary author then published a response to the responses. And so we just like completely mirrored that thing. And so Nishay wrote the main piece. We then had a handful of people who then commented on her piece, wrote their responses, and then Nishay replied to their responses. That's really the genesis of Psymposia in like kind of the digital print edition.
Oh yeah, because it didn't exist. You were just doing
that was the first thing we
right?
published
before that. Yeah, I forgot that was cool.
Yeah, that's how that was like the that was the start of what we did. I thought that kind of discourse was very cool because Robert Pollan, I think his name is Robert Pollan. He's like an economics professor at UMass. He just kind of like, commented on a lot of different kind of interdisciplinary fields. I thought it was a cool format for discourse. So you published the coming out, and then we forwarded that to a handful of different people. Some agreed, some disagreed with you, and then you commented on their replies too. So that's like really the genesis of how we started, because at that time there was only Reality Sandwich out there that was really doing anything. But I kind of wanted to get into more, I don't know, just talk about stuff.
When they were more always like in the woo space as well, whereas like
they were in more of like the spirituality type space. Look, they did a lot of good stuff. I got my start there for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I think they did evolve into the more woo space.
They evolved into the woo space.
That's correct. But to be fair, I do think that Psymposia, like the kind of the evolution of Psymposia, has definitely gone in the more political minded, leftist, radical like perspective through the team that we have now to the
and that's natural because politics are about who gets what, when, and how. And right now, that question is center stage.
Sure.
Most of the other
especially
media,
center stage. Go ahead.
Well, most of the other media is like for the normies. Like we're for the heads.
We're for the normies. Come on.
We're not 101. That's been our premise we're not trying to convert anybody.
That was actually the initial premise.
It's like the conversations in the hallways of the conferences, like people who are already interested.
Yes.
Like what kinds of conversations, what kind of discourse.
I stumbled into like working with Psymposia like my final year of college, and just because I was looking to write for somewhere that wasn't just surface level bullshit, because that was the only stuff I could find. And I found your series, Nishay, and like all of this stuff. And for me, a huge turning point and a really informative piece was Dave's, and this was after I'd started writing for Psymposia, but it's time to debunk prohibitionist narratives and calls for monopolies within psychedelic science. That was like, I've probably read that piece like 10 or 15 times, just because that was like really informative, and I'd never seen anything that put those two things together like that for me. And so
thanks.
I
mean, for me, like that's the approach that so for me, like coming from a background of like or my introduction, like when Nishay gave me the opportunity to speak at Psychedemia, like I wasn't envisioning any sort of
that had the poster boards.
Yeah,
it was. I'm gonna go ahead and
University. Do you have the
That's
picture?
That's a shout out to Brett right there.
What that was.
Because Brett was always like, when we were doing conferences afterwards, Brett was always like, we got to do the poster board thing. And I was Dr. No on that. I was just like, I don't know about the poster board thing, but you guys have brought it back.
It was magic. Like it was, we had organized it, but it came together like specifically the poster session, like magical beyond anyone's imagination. Like everyone who was there, it was this like mingling with like all these different conversations. Oh my
So
God.
I'm gonna brag on myself.
Hey,
I
hang
had
on.
the
Look at
best
that.
poster
What the
there.
fuck?
Like I actually had the best poster there.
That's an interesting
You're the
Bob
best
Ross painting.
afro there. What the hell, man?
That poster cost me $150. It was like, it was
Hey,
fucking
Dave.
expensive at the
Hey, that's
time. I
well
didn't have the
designed.
money. Huh?
That's well designed, Dave.
I have my moments when I'm not
It looks
coming
like a
up with
Nexus
wingnut shit.
post. I love it.
It was the Nexus font. It included a bunch of phytochemical, like actual, just like raw analytical data. It came with the fro. The number of people at Psychedemia who seemed to give me shit for having a fro was surprising. I thought I was going to be among, freaks and weirdos.
No, I'm not giving you shit. I'm giving you props, man. I wish I could
no,
go
but I'm
for
saying
like
the
that.
people
the Dave
there.
that I think
Fuck
I met,
them.
but I think you shaved that by 20.
Yeah. Well,
15?
I spent like the entire poster session troubleshooting people's DMT and mescaline extractions. And I was hoping the whole time I was hoping that people like the Hopkins crew and other researchers were going to like come up and like,
Dave.
that I could share the insights. They came up after. I was like floored, someone tapped me on the back and was like, are you the guy from the Nexus? We'd like to talk to you. I was like, you want to talk to me? I want to talk to you.
Dave, but did anyone come up to you and say, I think the LD50 of ayahuasca is about a gallon?
God damn it.
There was not such bullshit at the time. But
it's just inside baseball.
But so as a result of that, right? Like people invited me to come like talk about drugs and eventually it was culture. But when people invited me to talk about the cultural critiques, and I encountered the degree to which, when I saw what the discourse was like, when I saw the people getting up on stage and like giving these woo-woo, oh, if we just imagine a better future, it'll exist. Like, I was really turned off by that. I really struggled. Just real quick, and I'll shut up in a sec. But it was just like, for me, it was like, if we don't have actual analysis here, you've got 500 people staring at a stage listening to bullshit. Like, let's talk about what's actually going on. And it was exactly, as you said, Russ, it was aimed for the heads. It was like, I don't care if this doesn't have mass appeal. I don't care if this is never going to be like popular or desirable. If we can find the people who are interested in like drilling down into it and doing something with it, like maybe we can actually build some interesting projects around it. And finding all of y'all has been, phenomenal to that end.
So in 2015, Brett and we came up with the theme of that conference, which was envisioning a post-prohibition world. And everybody, I don't want to say everybody, but a bunch of the presenters showed up with like pretended that wasn't even the theme. And Dave comes in like actually thought about the theme. Like everybody was just like, I'm gonna do my traditional speech or whatever. And Dave actually put in time and effort into thinking about the concept of envisioning a post-prohibition world. And it's something that you and I have discussed, moving forward, like, okay, we don't have prohibition anymore. What's it actually look like?
I mean, that's something that I mentioned, and I don't even know if I even finished the thought earlier today. This came up in discussion.
In your class today.
Yeah. When you stop spending money on, terrorizing drug users and drug producers, you can implement something that is called public opulence. The amount of money that's spent on the drug war is obscene.
It is obscene,
but
compared to like actual lived experience, it is obscene. But compared to like actual federal expenditure on various various budgets, it's not like it's this obscene thing.
Okay, hang on.
Well,
I don't mean to be a cynic here.
You can be a
like
cynic all you
$50 billion,
want.
$100 billion.
We've all gotten $1,200 stimulus checks.
This is the same shit as the fucking the defund the police discourse. Defund the drug war, and guess what? We can put a fucking sweet plaza in every every municipality. What I'm talking about with public opulence is spending money on a society that works, that serves human enjoyment. Like, the drug war is an incredibly oppressive force. in the world. It's not the only or even the biggest oppressive force in the world. I'm not saying that. But if
it's unnecessary though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if
and
as,
entirely
I-
easy
my-
to
my
identify
argument
as
against
such.
Oregon is going to reallocate a lot of resources as a result of this.
Yeah, my argument against it would be on the incredible violence of the supply chain, on
so not to
on the
toot my own
demand
horn,
of the U.S. markets.
but that goes
agree.
back to something I talked about in the Psymposia Q&A from that same talk, when somebody, the question of like gun smuggling came up, right? You're still going to have crime, you're still going to have cartels, you're still going to have, but again, this goes back to more fundamental questions of human relations. How do we organize? Like the part of, to my mind, again, the desire for an anarchic society is not that it's a utopia that magically resolves every issue we've got, but that it presents us with like sort of a baseline, a foundation, a sort of starting point to sort of configure how we want to engage with the problems we as human beings living on the earth are inevitably going to encounter. And I know we got to wrap soon.
Ways.
We have two questions that I'd like to just bring up.
Just a quick plug that there's going to be a book coming out. A phenomenal author, Yoan Grillo, is coming out, and I saw a tweet today that he did. His next book is called Blood, Gun, Money. It's about like the trafficking of arms, weapons from the United States to Mexico to basically enforce, the supply chain of drugs into the United States. I've been looking forward to this book for a couple of years now. I think it's going to be the first book that actually kind of looks at the supplying of the paramilitary forces, cartels that actually go into it's the infrastructure of it's necessary to the supply chain of like illicit substances to the United States. It's like, it's just the cost of doing business. To all of that. So I'm really looking forward to that book, because most of those arms actually come in through, I think, I'm looking forward to reading the book, but I think they come in from like kind of those, Texas, Arizona, that corridor that's supplying all those weapons to keep the drug industry up and running.
So the two last questions, and then we'll wrap because we're coming on 3 hours. We have one,
which is pretty typical for a live stream, I just want to say.
Yeah. So the general one, which we've already kind of touched on, but considering people maybe came late, worth touching on again. What would McKenna say about Elon Musk and Gwyneth Paltrow advocating for psychedelics? How does privilege factor into set and setting? And the other one is, does anyone here know any groups or co-ops or organizations of Mazatec or Oaxacan mutual aid groups I can support as a way to give back for my psilocybin use?
The last one I think I have an answer for, and that would be the Sabina Project. That is a group that I don't know what their current status is, but I know they have expressed like intentions to create solidarity with those communities, drawing from the psychedelic community. So it is, I can chuck that link. I'm going to chuck it in the chat right now. Oh, Russell already said it.
And I'm not familiar.
Here's the URL.
I'm not familiar with their specifics, but it does feel important to say, like, vet any of the organizations.
Yeah, please. Like, this is, we don't know much.
There was an organization that was sharing commentary, and I want to be clear because this is a kind of difficult and messy situation, but there was an organization that was sharing sort of commentary and memoirs based on supposed recollections or accountings of a certain indigenous lineage. There's an anthropologist, Ben Feinberg. There's plenty of problematic issues with the way that he's covered and discussed certain indigenous folks. He's also raised a number of really interesting questions around the lineage of Maria Sabina and people who picked up some of her artifacts and some of the jockeying in different communities around those lineages. And when I tried to ask follow-up questions of people connected to some of the figures involved, I got responses that to me were profoundly unsatisfying. They didn't actually address the questions themselves, the things that were on the ethnographic record as being like concerns around like cultural hegemony and who owns whichever sort of lineages and narratives, and sort of cultural preservation, right, as this sort of idyllic single fixed notion versus some of the exchange and interchange. So again, like I don't have any good answers to that question in particular, and Sabina Project sounds like a solid starting place, but please make sure you vet whoever you're looking into. Also, I would suggest if you reach out to Kat Harrison over at Botanical Dimensions, she's spent a number of years working with at least one Mazatec family, and she may actually be able to put you in touch with people or point you in a direction. Sorry, it took me so long to come up with that. The other thing that I would throw out there, dealing with, so we addressed the what would McKenna say. I mean, I think in the case of Elon Musk and Gwyneth Paltrow, like again, we said we didn't want to put words in a dead man's mouth, so I'm not going to put this in McKenna's mouth. I'm just going to say it's quite clear that Musk and Paltrow are both on a whole bunch of bullshit. You know,
and I shared our this is what mainstreaming looks like episode where we go pretty in depth to that phenomenon. So
I think it's actually a real great question to just ask the question of what would McKenna, Watts, and Wilson,
Robert Anton Wilson,
and what is your understanding of them? What does your understanding of them like mean about how you feel about something? Like if you think Terrence McKenna would have a big issue with what's going on right now, do you feel that way too? Because
it's not even worth explaining what McKenna would. I don't mean to be a jerk, but like I think we know what McKenna would say. What's going on? I think we know what his thoughts would be about what's going on right now.
And for whatever it's worth,
really a shame that he's not around to comment.
I mean, we know the gist, but we certainly wouldn't know the fucking.
We wouldn't have
56 paragraphs that would come out of his mouth discussing it.
Yeah.
Well, and also, go ahead, Nishay.
Well, I just speaking of like Thought Slime earlier, really rad YouTube channel that I recommend everyone watch. But I just watched something he did about Elon Musk and like this kind of like mythos, Iron Man mythos of this like great like genius. And I think a lot of privileged folks kind of get to play like superhero or like savior in different ways by like, you know, aligning themselves with psychedelics and being this like radical like underbelly, but actually they're just like playing into like they like Elon Musk hasn't actually done like he has like people invent things under him, but he's like,
well, we've confirmed the Elon Musk psychedelics thing though.
Well, yeah, but I was just
quietly, yes.
Just I think a lot of like I did with my last video on YouTube, like privileged folks get to play act like saving the world with psychedelics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're like effectively changing the system.
No, it's not enough that they are the richest and most opulent members of the global community. They also must be morally worshipped.
Yeah, I mean, okay. That's
Musk is just the worst. There was an article on him recently about just working his workers like crazy. It's a joke. I can't believe anyone.
Behind the Bastards has a great Musk episode. So
yeah, they do.
Somebody has also asked about. I'm assuming it's. Sorry. Somebody asked about Christian Angermeyer's art collection and whether or not we've talked about it.
I just want to say that I appreciate that someone has paid attention and
I'm assuming that's Michael Hagen. And sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Like seriously,
because
sorry.
It's hilarious.
But like
it's just
to
too
me,
much.
It's hilarious.
Too much.
Okay, so I'm going to give the real quick rundown. Basically, Christian Angermeyer claimed that he's got this bronze statue of Osiris.
You're gonna get into this.
And I'm sure, I'm just going to do this one real quick because this is the one that fucked me off, right? So he claims that he's got this bronze statue of Osiris. Right? And he says, oh, mythology connects him with a tree that contains dimethyltryptamine. So what he's talking about is Acacia nilotica, except that Acacia nilotica doesn't actually appear to contain any DMT. Like there was a Shulgin monograph that made an error that like incorrectly attributed DMT based on, it seems like a bunch of different basically confusion in the phytochemistry that was done. Then there's like another paper that has a single TLC reference value. If you're not familiar with TLC, basically it's a fairly crude method of analysis where you
thin layer
like
chromatography.
Yeah, thin layer chromatography. You let compounds run up like this sheet, and then you see how high it's gone, and based on how far it's traveled over the sheet, based on the solvent you used, it gives you a sense of what compound it should be. Long story short, there's not any real good evidence that Acacia nilotica contains any DMT, but he's running around telling people that, you know, he's acquired some rare statue that has psychedelic collection.
Can somebody in the MAPS ayahuasca study confirm whether or not it's got you know, some, I mean, like they could do that.
I thought you wanted to rap. If you're going to get us into the MAPS ayahuasca study, you're going to make problems.
Yeah, we should rap. Look,
he's also got real
we
quick,
can go forever, y'all. We'll be crazy.
We'll be back though.
No? Russell, doesn't he have a holy grail or something?
No, he's trying to get a cup from the Eleusinian Mysteries. What's it called?
A Kurnos.
But my favorite that came up in the Sifted piece was he has a friend who made a triptych, like a, I don't know what you'd see it like an altar, out of only materials from the last seconds of a dying star.
Good God.
Oh my God.
Which I don't know. Interesting piece. It just spoke to the opulence of his
I just want the most you know, the most refined distillation of death of a celestial being.
Exactly.
or something.
Who can blame you?
Whatever it is that sounds cool over cocktails that are way too expensive.
It's pretty.
I'm sure it is.
It's just kind of like I don't know. It's just this weird exercise and like, hey guys, I'm legitimate. You know, like, hey guys,
I'm one of you.
I got some art. I don't know. It's just super weird to me.
I did go on the record in our chat saying I'd go see it in a museum though.
Amanda Pratt says, seems like a good note to end on.
Well, we can take a hint. We may be socially awkward, but we can take a hint. Seriously, huge thanks to y'all.
Yeah, everybody who tuned in. This is the first. We'll do more.
Yeah,
we'll send emailers and publish on social when we're gonna do live streams and the like.
Yeah, really. Oh,
I was gonna say, I feel like it'll be in the future, like just things unlike our podcast, which have more like specific focus and like informational like content to it. Like I feel like this is going to be the kind of thing where you can like drop in, hang out for a while, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, this is fun. This is a great opportunity to kind of connect with people, and this has been a lot of fun for me because the podcasts are just like, oh, we're sitting here by ourselves, you know, and the live streams are fun. There's been like, it seems like there's been hundreds of comments here.
Yeah, I'll have to learn how to balance my attention because I definitely get distracted by comments.
I've just been
split screen
here, and yeah, it's great. I really appreciate everybody that has joined this, and it's cool.
Yeah, and we're really hoping for Psymposia going forward being kind of like a bat signal, you know, in the sky for these kinds of conversations in community, you know, just so like people can like get involved and, you know, pursue these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. But yeah, again, we're looking at, I think the goal, if I recall correctly, is like a monthly live stream.
At least once a month. Yeah.
And yeah, it's been fantastic to hear what people are thinking about, keep an ear to the ground. And so thank you all for,
I think it's awesome that people are commenting in here, and like, I feel like we're speaking to our people, you know?
Yeah.
It's real cool to be able to connect with everyone.
And feel free to either shoot us emails at hi@symposia.com or
we do read the emails.
On social media. Check out the podcast if you haven't.
And we have a mailing list in case anyone happens to have come from YouTube and not be on the mailing list. The update.
And we get a couple patrons from this, so thank you.
Cool.
Oh, really?
That's huge.
Thank you so much.
Wow,
and I'm going to be
great.
shameless and say, if you listen to the podcast, if you don't listen to the podcast, if you end up listening to the podcast and feel inclined to leave us a 5-star review. That's huge.
Oh, yeah,
it goes
helps
a long
out.
way
Yeah,
in like
likes and
getting
comments
recognition and all
stuff,
of that.
Honestly, go on
yeah.
to, if you have an iPhone. I only have an iPhone, so I don't know.
Lean forward, Normie. We can only
Yeah.
hear
Yeah,
you.
you're so
I don't know the
quiet.
process on an Android, but if you have an iPhone, go on to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star
Yeah.
review. It would be very appreciated.
But
Okay,
thanks
y'all.
y'all for turning out. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
thanks so much. Into the future.
That it?
Woo.
Catch you soon.
All right, I gotta figure out how to end this.
Now we all get to awkwardly sit around
gonna be,
as he figures out the.
Well, till we figure out how to get
Come
out, get
on,
out of
Russ, I
here.
like your.
We can
Where's
all-
your
oh, there-
mustache, Pace?
Yeah,
I'm
Pace
working
needs a
on-
mustache.
working on it.
Embarrassment.
Russ is
hang
rocking
on,
those.
hang on.
All right, so long, everybody.
I had to put on my sunglasses.
Oh.
and
I'm ending it.
Is that a mustache? Yeah, that's a mustache.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, we're done.
Is it?